Hi, my name is Tatiana Sholikova. I'm a photographer, and this is my online lecture about color in photography. Let's get started soon. I want to make you fall in love with this topic to show you all the possibilities for a conscious work with color. It will be a very inspiring lecture, and I'm sure it will inspire you to create stunning photos on a new level. So, to begin with, you need to understand one basic truth. Color is the sensation a person experiences when light reflected from objects hits their eye. For example, we see light falling on an apple. The light is reflected from the surface of the apple onto the retina of the eye. And the retina has three types of receptors: red, green, and blue. Thanks to them, the light from the apple in our perception has color. From the retina, the information goes to our brain. The brain processes this information and we perceive this apple as red. Many people will think it's red, but at the same time, one particular color can cause different perceptions in different people, because there are several characteristics of how different people and animals are able to see color. That is, in rare case, a person may decide that this apple is not red. On the next slide, we see that there is vision with standard color perception, and there is vision with different deviations, which even have their own names. As a result, the same color can be perceived differently for each person. Therefore, it's useless to argue about what color is actually in any object. In the end, color is a completely subjective characteristic. It depends on physiological features and even on the mood, emotions, and memories of each individual person. Even twins with identical eyes can perceive color differently. The most important thing to understand is that your perception of color may not coincide with the perception of other people. Also, the perception of color in humans is different from the perception of color in other living organisms. For example, a cow perceives color in a completely different way than a human being, and each creature's color perception depends on its lifestyle and environment. I have a color perception test for you. You need to count how many shades you see here, how many lines you see. Here are the results. You can use them to determine your type of color perception. The standard is when you have three types of receptors in your eye: red, green, blue. But if you see less than 20 colors, you may only have two types of color-sensitive receptors in your eye. There is also the possibility that you may have four types of receptors, so you can see more colors. When I took this test, I detected 38 shades and I am a tetrachromatist. Try taking this test too. I wonder how many shades you will see. You can also find other tests and research your color perception. Going further, here is an interesting topic about the origin of color using physics as an example and its history and research. It may inspire you to use some effects on your shoots. So let's look at optical glasses. There is a transparent glasses like these. They have a special composition and are used to make various parts and optical instruments, for example, for eyeglasses or binoculars. Optical glass differs from technical glass in that optical glass has a special high transparency. They are characterized by purity, colorlessness, and uniformity. The different facets of optical glass are able to refract the light that comes through them. What does it mean? There are different kinds of optical glasses. They can have different shapes. And in some examples, we can see that these glasses can be used for taking pictures. You can take pictures through them, you can pass light through them, and then some interesting effects will appear on the surface. And as we can see, these effects will be colored, which is very interesting because glass has no color. It's pure, colorless, and transparent. But on the third picture on the left, we see that the light shines through transparent glass and different colored spots appear on the surface. Here is how photographers use these effects in their shoots. By shooting through optical glass with certain facets, you can multiply objects, change their size, or get color effects. Try shooting with optical glasses too. I wonder what you get. Why are we discussing this? Let me explain. Imagine there is such a thing as prism. A prism is, in other words, the same as optical glass. A prism is a glass body made of optical glass. It comes in different shapes, but we are interested in the shape of a triangle to discuss the topic of color. This is what it looks like. It has rectangular facets and it has triangles at its ends. And now I'm going to tell you how this thing came to be. In 1666, the scientist Newton conducted an experiment. He passed light through this transparent body in a dark room, and saw as a result of this a colored rainbow of 7 primary colors. There are many shades here, but the main colors are exactly 7. Thus, since that moment, it's accepted to allocate 7 main colors, so we get an extra confirmation that color does not really exist. And the most important thing, thanks to what we see color, is light. Without light, we cannot see anything. Here are a couple of good examples of how the color changes depending on the light. Look at the right side of the picture. And we see that the green color is much lighter than in the left part. This is because there is more light on the right side and the object is in shadow on the left. We understand that the walls are equally painted in the same color, but because of different lighting, we see the same color differently. Somewhere it's darker, somewhere it's lighter. And it's the same story here. The same color has different shades depending on the degree of illumination. It's a proof that color is light. Knowing this, when shooting and processing, we understand that the color of our shot will depend on the light. Here we also see an example where there are lighter or darker spots. The color is the same and the spots are due to the light. And here we see a soft light falling on the model from the top left, and her dress is blue on the shoulders, but almost black on the bottom. In fact, the sleeves of the dress are a uniform blue color, but it looks different depending on the lighting. And here is the same story. Light also comes in different temperatures, from blue to orange, in other words, from cold to warm. And if you turn on halogen lamps in a white room, it will be yellow light, and we will see all objects in warm colors. And if you turn on incandescent lamps, they will give a cold shade and the walls will seem blue. Also, if you place a color filter in front of the light source, the light will be colored. When shooting, it's important to get the white balance right in the settings for the type of lighting you are using, and in processing you can adjust it to the best possible result. White balance is considered correct when you have all objects in their real colors. But if you are using color filters, such as red, the correct white balance will be the one where red looks the most natural. So we remembered that color is light, and now let's see how it looks in Photoshop when processed. Here we see the color tone line. That's analogous to Newton's rainbow. Then a scale for adjusting color saturation. And the brightness scale, which like lighting, can make the color darker or lighter. Using curves in Photoshop, we will also see a curve, thanks to which you can control the brightness in different areas, as well as color curves to adjust the hues in different areas. Curves is the most important panel in Photoshop for creating any color correction, and you will learn how to work with it in Lesson 5 about final color correction. Next, let's take a look at the camera raw interface. There are also settings for color brightness and hue control. You will also see similar settings in Capture One or Lightroom. Any program has these tools, and you will learn more about them from the lessons on processing. And knowledge from this lecture will allow you to consciously approach the choice of color in preparation for shooting, and on the shooting itself, and at the time of processing. You will be able to better understand what colors in the frame are the main, and what shade should be each color to make the photo look harmonious. For example, your main colors are blue sky and green grass, are depending on the weather, light and mood you can pick up the most successful shades and brightness in processing. Sometimes in the frame there is a color that does not fit in the frame, and then this color can be radically changed or removed from the frame. Let's go further and see what happened after Newton stated that color is light. Many scientists conducted their own experiments and investigated color. We will study color based on the research of Johannes Itten, who created the color wheel. It's the one that has become the most popular, and its patterns make a piece of art absolutely harmonious. So what do we see here? The most important thing is that there are 3 main colors: yellow, blue and red. These colors cannot be obtained with the help of any other colors. That is, you cannot mix something and get, for example, blue. And exactly the same with red and yellow. And if to mix these 3 colors with each other, for example, blue with yellow, it will receive green. Yellow with red will give orange color, and blue with red, violet. This mixing gives us 3 more main colors, and it turns out that there are only 6 main groups of color, and each of these 6 groups has a lot of different shades. By the way, if you mix 3 colors, yellow, red and blue, you get white. This again tells us that light is color and color is light. So we have 6 groups of colors, and we start learning about color schemes. Color combination schemes are an amazing, inspiring thing I want to tell you about. When you learn this and experience it, you won't be able to watch movies in peace. You will notice color combination schemes. This happens to me all the time, absolutely automatically. Let's take a look at 7 basic schemes. This will be quite enough to make the right decisions at the moment of color correction. On each of the schemes, I have indicated points of matching colors. For example, on the complementary scheme, we see 2 points, they are opposite each other. But you must realize that this line can be rotated. As a result, yellow is combined with the violet. But the line can turn, and no matter how it did not turn, the color opposite the other people will give us a harmonious combination. So, for example, on this scheme, orange perfectly combines with blue and red with green. Lines and points on other schemes can also shift and rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. You will quickly remember these patterns when you practice to recognize them, and your practice will begin with me right now. When you used to look at different pieces of art, you may not have understood why color seems so pleasing and harmonious to you. You may have intuitively thought it was beautiful, and now you will understand how it really works. And let's explore the first scheme. It's called monochrome, and it consists of one color, and it can have many shades of it. Here is a great example with the color orange and its many shades. And here we see only yellow color and its shades. And here again it's just the color yellow. Next is the complementary, or in other words, contrast scheme. This is a combination of 2 colors that are located opposite each other. For example, in these photos, we see the combination of green and red. Note that these colors are different in brightness. For example, in the photo on the right, the red is much more saturated and brighter than the green background color. In this case, it looks harmonious and the viewer's attention is drawn to the boots. It's a great technique because the boots in this photo are the main ones. And if the green color was saturated, the boots would not look so expressive and voluminous. In the photo on the left, our attention is taken by the red suit, and the rich green leaves perfectly complement the composition and attract attention to the lines. The background is turquoise in color, but it's very close to the green color, and that's a good thing too. Interesting point, this background in life could be blue, a cooler shade, but when processing it could be turquoise on purpose because this color is more like green. And red goes perfectly with green because it's complementary scheme. So that's why it's good to know about the patterns of color combination, because you can create a harmony of hues in your processing. Next option, I love these 2 colors, pink with light green. It's a contrasting combination too. It looks great. Again, I want to say that the shades of these colors could look different in real life. We don't always have the opportunity to match the color of a location or clothing so perfectly when shooting. And this house could have been yellow, for example, and when processing it was made light green, and it matches better with the pink color. Also, this photo could have been not so colorful originally, and the retoucher was able to make it that way. That's what we process photos for, to give the photos a finished look, to make them more expressive. Another example of a contrasting scheme, and again the combination of pink and green. This is the work of Guy Bourdin. He did an amazing job with colors and has some very inspiring fashion photos. Next, and here is how blue and orange go together. It looks absolutely excellent, real art. And here is all blue, but there is also a light beige color. Beige is a shade of orange, so it goes just as well with blue. And I'm pretty sure this colored beige background was not used here, and this colored beige spot was drawn for contrast, because it goes perfectly with the light beige color on the jeans. Next, here is an ad campaign using blue skies and walls, skin and boots in shades of orange. And here is a blue sky and orange clothing, but also there are black, gray and white colors. They are called achromatic colors. And the other colors are called chromatic. Here is just blue and orange. Here is an example where yellow against purple is a super bright combination. Here is with any other color scheme, proportion is important. If we take pure yellow and pure violet in same proportions, we might get a visually unpleasant result. But here we see saturated purple, a small piece of bright yellow color and a light yellow background. If the background were as saturated as the sweater, it would be painful for us to look at. Here are shots from the movie La La Land. We can see that there is a lot of purple and a little yellow accent. It's absolutely gorgeous, and that's where our attention is. I recommend you to watch my lecture about composition so that you understand how to place color spots in the frame in the most harmonious way. You should also understand an interesting thing. In color photography, we can influence the composition by using color spots. But if the photo is black and white, we can control the composition only by working with lines, shape and brightness. The third color scheme is analog. This is a combination of several colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. For example, here is a combination of yellow, orange and red. Note how beautiful and bright look small spots of rich red color on the contrast with the muted tones of yellow and orange. So moving on, another example of what an analog scheme can look like. Here we see a combination of colors blue, green and yellow. Yellow looks contrasting in relation to blue, but it's not a complementary scheme because for complete harmony there is also green color. It's the middle color between the blue and yellow and perfectly links them together in the frame. The next example, this is also a combination of green, blue and yellow, but less saturated and very elegant. Here is another photo in the same colors. Here is a great combination of rich dark green color with a light blue tint and light skin that looks contrasting on the background of the combination of green and blue. Next, colors, and this too is an analog scheme. Again, the light shade of purple contrasts against the bright and rich red-orange sand. It's absolutely beautiful when there is a contrast of light and dark, bright and faded, saturated and muted, but the color combination schemes are unchanging. The following scheme, the classic triad, and we see a popular combination again. It's red, blue and yellow. These are great examples. On the left we see a version in muted tones. In the right is a version with saturated tones. And I want to bring up the processing again and say that the sky originally might not have been that saturated and not that blue at all. But the retoucher could realize that here it's necessary to achieve a harmonious combination of blue, red and yellow, and that's why he made the sky like this. If the source of this photo fell into the hands of a beginner and he would just blindly apply a preset with a warm effect, as many people like, then perhaps the sky would have turned out turquoise and the grass and clothes beige and brown. Also, let me ask you a question. Do you think there could be a model with black hair in this photo? No, it's the blonde hair that is beautiful in this shot. It's the one with the texture that blends perfectly with the texture of the grass. So not only the retoucher could create the right harmony of shades, but the photographer and stylist also worked on this shot from the beginning. After all, the stylist also chose exactly the red clothes for this location, and no other color would have worked here as perfectly as red. We go further, and here we also see a combination of blue, yellow and red. Note that they look like three spots, but each color has different shades depending on how the light falls. Due to this, picture looks voluminous. The stylist who put this look together could have specifically matched the blue dress with the red hat and added a yellow accent. Speaking of which, I draw your attention to the fact that everything is not accidental and the creators of the frame can think about such little things. And here we see the combination of red, blue and yellow again, but the shades are quite different. They look delicate, not at all as contrasty and saturated as in the previous shot. The next example of this color scheme, pay attention, here yellow has a greenish tint and certain shades of red and blue are successfully matched to it. The blue here is very close to cyan, but if it were violet, these photos would not seem so harmonious and blue objects would not look so contrasting. When processing, the retouching could have specifically chosen these shades to achieve harmony. Let's continue studying the triad scheme. Here we see three colors: green jacket, orange wall and skin, and the purple accessory around his neck. The next scheme is also a triad, but it's unusual. The scheme is called contrast triad. In this scheme, two colors are placed opposite to one. In this photo, we have pink color and opposite to it two more colors, yellow and green. Here both photos have the same scheme but different shades of the primary colors. So you can see how the same scheme can appear differently in practice. In life, the green wall in the photo on the right could have been saturated and blue at all, but the retoucher could have chosen a more appropriate shade to harmonize with the coat. And on the photo on the left, the sky and water could have a pronounced blue color, but we don't need it here at all, and during processing it could be intentionally removed. In other words, to make the water more green and the sky more colorless. And here is an example of this scheme in a Warhol painting. Here we also see a combination of pink, yellow and blue, which is very close to green. And here is the same scheme, but with other colors. On the left we see saturated shades, on the right muted, but both photos have the same scheme of color combination. Next, let's consider square and rectangular schemes. Here, for example, is a beautiful advertising shot where all four colors are present and they go well together. And this small purple spot perfectly complements the three colors. Often we can see schemes of four colors in movies or in such complex photos where there is a lot of detail. And of course, here everything is stunningly balanced in both composition and color. It's easy for the viewer to perceive, as if exactly such colors in such shades should be here. And if we replace the blue suit with black, we will lose all the magic of this shot, and this is absolutely true. We see the same combination here, but the shades are light and muted. The pink wall is a lighter shade of red, and also we see here a light yellow, light blue and light green. And this photo wouldn't look so beautiful if, for example, the yellow wall was blue. Now let's look at the rectangular diagram. There are four colors here too, absolutely stunning combination of red and purple and a wonderful addition in the form of green and yellow combination. We can say that in rectangular schemes we combine two analog schemes and place them opposite each other. Here is, for example, analog combination of green and yellow and opposite analog combination of blue and violet. When processing, the retoucher can intentionally give the grass a yellow tint for such a harmonious combination. There are some services that can help you in your work. Here you can choose the colors that are in your photo, see the best options for their combination. And when processing, you will absolutely consciously work with each color and create this harmony in the frame. For example, in your photo there are four colors and you can try to use a rectangular scheme. We choose the colors that are in your photo. This allows us to see what kind of harmony we can bring the color combination in our photo too, and we just do that. In processing lessons, I often say that you don't need to do color at random. I want you to learn to understand why you make the decision to make the grass more yellow, the sky more purple, and so on. If you are preparing for a shoot and are thinking up an image, this service will be useful for you as well. Don't forget that the spot of any desired color we can get not only in the form of the object, but thanks to the light. Our next topic is color contrast. This is another technique by which we can make the color in our photos harmonious. This technique is a great addition to the knowledge of color combination schemes. Color contrast has several types. The first type is complementary contrast. Its principle is the same as the contrast scheme of color combination. Recall, these are two colors that are opposite each other in the color wheel. For example, purple and yellow, orange and blue, green and red, and others. Besides the fact that these are contrasting colors in relation to each other, they also have other types of contrast. For example, purple and yellow are contrasting colors because in the color wheel they are opposite each other. But it's also a contrast of light and dark. Purple is a pretty dark color, while yellow looks light and bright. Orange and blue are contrasting colors, but they have another contrast. They contrast of cool and warm. With any contrast, we can make the photo more interesting and draw attention to the main elements and make them more expressive. The next type is quantitative contrast. It appears between two objects in the frame, which are painted in different colors, have different mass in the frame. For example, here the boots fill a small part of the frame, but the background is a different color and it occupies a much larger area in the frame. The boots in this shot are a color accent. Similarly, the lips in the photo on the right are an accent color. These photos are impossible to imagine without these accents. They definitely play a big role here. Note that this is at the same time a complementary contrast. It's a combination of green and red, and also a contrast of saturated and muted color. In one photo can combine several types of contrast, and we see it on the example of these photos. Next, I will tell you about the types of contrast that are related to our vision. It will be like a test. The first kind is simultaneous contrast. This contrast appears only in our brain. You see only a yellow square in front of you and there is no other color. And the trick is that when the brain recognizes the yellow color, it tries to find a second complementary color. In this case, it does not find it, so it starts to color it itself. Let's do an experiment. You need to look at a small white square inside a yellow square for a while. Stop this video and try to look without looking away. How's that? As a reminder, the complementary color to yellow is purple. So if you have standard sight without any peculiarities, your white square has taken on a violet hue. This may not be widely applicable in photography, but in graphic design this knowledge is useful. If a graphic designer writes yellow text on a white background or purple text on a black background, the effect can be quite heavy and unpleasant to see. For illustrators, this knowledge is also very important. In Neaton's book, there was a case like this. The director of a textile factory producing textiles for ties noticed that a certain batch of ties had not been sold for a long time. Later, he found out that in fact they were red ties with black stripes. Eventually, they looked a closer look at them and realized that many people perceived this black color as green. It was an unpleasant effect for eyesight, so such ties were not bought. The next kind is border contrast. It's two similar colors next to each other, and if we look into the line of junction of these colors, we can see lines of other shades. Try such an experiment. Next is the sequential contrast. If you look at a red spot for 30 seconds and then shift your gaze to a white area, you will see the same spot but of a different complementary color. In this case, some see green, some see blue. I personally see blue, just such a bright, saturated blue. The next look is the contrast of warm and cold. I already mentioned it, but let's take a closer look at this look. This photo is a great example to explore this type. Cold colors we always perceive as something distant, and here the background just seems to us as far away as possible, and warm colors, on the contrary, as something close. Here we see them in the skin of the models, and they are really in the foreground, so the photo looks voluminous. It's the contrast of color and contrast of warm and cold helped to divide the frame into different plans and achieve such volume. Here are more variants of volume by working with color and its brightness. Bright backgrounds seem very distant and in the background, while bright dark silhouettes, on the contrary, look very close. This is such a pattern, and the degree of distance between the background and the objects in the foreground depends on how strong the contrast between them is. Such photos always look very expressive, voluminous, and deep. Let's look at other examples. Their difference is that there is a dark background and light silhouettes, and we perceive the light silhouettes as something closer and the dark background as something distant. It's as if the lighter parts of the picture have been hit by the lighting because they are close, and the elements that have been hit by less light look darker. Now let's talk about black and white photography. Here we have two tonal options. The first option is a light tonality. It's characterized by gray and pure white tones. Dark or black spots can be only accents in the form of small spots or thin lines. In light tonality, you cannot shoot anything. For example, we cannot shoot a black cat on a black background. We can shoot something light against a light background. For example, a light-haired girl on a light background. And the second option is a dark tone. Here most of the photo is dark. Black and white photography has a couple of secrets. Knowing about them will help you to avoid such a situation where you randomly decided just to make the photo black and white because you had difficulty working with color. Beginners often make this mistake. The first, the success of a black and white photo is ensured if there is a contrast in brightness in the frame, for example, light skin of the model on a dark background. Second, the image can tell us about what is happening in three languages: color, shape, and lines. When we remove color, only shape and lines remain, and it's their successful combination that will produce any effect in the viewer. Sometimes we don't have the right to remove color because without it, the meaning of the image is lost. Most stunning color photos will be absolutely nothing in black and white, and on the contrary, all successful black and white photos are absolutely complete and don't need coloring. Now I invite you to look at the work of artists, filmmakers, and photographers and find the patterns you now know about. Painting and cinema are older arts than photography, so photographers sort of learns and borrows that knowledge from the painting and movie industry. That's why when you are looking for references and inspiration for your shoots, you can look at different pieces of art. In films, pick up on light and color. In paintings, so too the combination of colors, and sculpture can inspire you for poses for your models. Everything in this world can be an inspiration, so explore the beauty that surrounds you. And the knowledge I have given you about color and composition will allow you not just to look, but to analyze and understand why a piece of art is so expressive and appealing. Let's begin our study with paintings. Van Gogh. On the left, we see a field with green grass, blue sky, yellow flowers. It's all an analog combination of three colors. And on the right is a completely yellow picture, and we realize that is a monochrome combination. This is what you and I have been studying, and it's these patterns that are very clearly visible in the artist's work. Next, Salvador Dali. In the center is an analog combination, red, orange and yellow. On the left is a contrasting combination of blue and orange. In the works of Andy Warhol, we can also see that the colors in his paintings are not random. For example, on the photo on the left is a rectangular scheme where red is combined with purple and green with yellow. And here are the works of Pablo Picasso. There is quite a lot of color in his works, but if we start to take it apart, we will always find certain patterns. You can be inspired and use the combination of colors in paintings to create your photos. For example, you like the combination of colors in the picture on the left, and you can use it in your photos. And here are Mark Rothko's works. In the painting in the center, for example, I see a combination of purple and yellow and blue and orange. And on the right is an analog scheme. Next is Claude Monet, stunning combination of pink and green on the right, and the combination of red, blue and yellow in the painting on the left. Jasper Johns, try now to see for yourself the color combination schemes you see here. Amedeo Modigliani is interested in the color and shape of his models. Remember that you can be inspired by different elements in different types of art. In your shot, you can have makeup inspired by a flower and the shape by Amedeo Modigliani, while you can shoot it with a super wide-angle lens inspired by a modern fashion photographer. Next up is Kazimir Malevich. In his works, we see patches of pure color, so he is very useful to study. Henri Matisse, I also recommend him for studying color. When you look at a piece of art, try to ask yourself, what kind of photo does this painting, movie, sculpture inspire me to do? Here is another unusual artist, Roy Lee. His works are imitations of comic books. They also have spots of pure color, and it's very interesting to study. Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. Here, for example, on the left is a stunning combination, blue, violet, red. It's definitely an analog scheme. And so on Juan Miró. On the right, for example, is analog combination of green, yellow and blue. And here is Yves Klein, just one color and an accent on the shape. Marc Chagall. On the left we see a combination of red and purple and yellow and green. Next, let's look at the photos of famous photographers. I will show you exactly those photographers who are known for their rich colors. This is the case when in their works color is very important, and in black and white they would lose their meaning. The first one is, of course, Miles Aldrich. His photos want to look at and just enjoy to bold combination of bright colors. This is a perfect example of when we see a lot of color but our eyes are quite comfortable. David LaChapelle is love. He has shot all the Hollywood celebrities, and his color is also so very skillfully used, exactly in such a way that the viewers is taken aback by such glamour of kitsch and pathos. Steve McCurry is an American photojournalist, also characterized by his vibrant color. Interesting in that he uses it in documentary photography, whereas scenes can be very different and not at all glamorous like the previous photographers. In general, I have seen more black and white photography in photojournalism and less color photography, so that's what makes Steve McCurry interesting. Sarah Moon is an amazing photographer, and her fashion work, which looks like paintings, is still in demand today. Alex Webb is a street photographer who used to shoot in black and white. Then he had a period when he went into a creative crisis. He was missing something in his work. He decided to use color, and he was right. I told you that some images don't work without color. I think that's Alex's case. His work really became super cool with the advent of color. So later is also a street photographer. By the way, about street photographer, you can take a shot every day and it will develop you. You don't have to organize an elaborate shoot every day. You can just take your camera phone with you and be attentive on the street and notice some interesting color combinations. I hope that after this lecture you will really start to do it, if you don't already do it. Moreover, these same photos can then become part of your mood board for a big shoot, where sunset colors, for example, will be the inspiration for the image. Then Harry Gruyere and his beautiful combination of yellow, blue and red in the photo on the right, for example. Ernst Haas, incredible combination of yellow and purple. Next, Konstantin Manos, unreal beautiful analog combination of red, purple and pink in the photo on the left. David Alan Harvey, we only have one color in the photo on the left and right, but it looks amazing. Next, I will recommend a few films where it's useful to explore color. Usually viewers are only interested in the script and the story, and if the script is uninteresting or incomprehensible to a particular viewer, the movie seems uninteresting. But movies can be watched not only for the script. For example, you can now analyze color and composition. And a person who understands psychology, for example, will be able to watch the film and analyze the characters and behavior of characters. The first movie is Hotel Grand Budapest, and we see on the left what we talked about in this lecture, the contrast of warm and cold, the combination of blue and orange. In this case, the street of cold blue color seems distant to us, and the characters on warm to warm orange light falls on the contrary are very close to the viewer. And on the photo on the right is my favorite analog combination of red and purple. Basketball Diary, when I was looking at that scene where he's running through the field of flowers, I was very inspired. It's such a beautiful combination. Green grass, pink flowers, naked body, and the sky with blue, pink and purple hues. Catch Me If You Can, stunning combination of pink and orange. And the scene shot has a very nice combination of yellow and purple and is complemented by the color blue, and the standard contrasting combination of blue and orange on the right. Breakfast at Tiffany's. Even if you have already watched these movies, watch them again, but with new knowledge. Because before you could watch or not see any patterns of color combination and not understand why the curtains in a storefront are green, for example. Freedom, very bright, saturated colors and a stunning combination of different prints. Next, Lawrence Anyways, a beautiful movie with many scenes with rich color accents. Great Beauty, the film is interesting to study in many ways, including in terms of composition. Next up is Crimson Peak. The costumes here are stunning and of course the detailed work with color is beautiful. Life of Pi, there are a lot of shots with analog or monochrome scheme. Next up is Spring Breakers, a light comedy but with a good deep meaning and beautiful colors. Inside Llewyn Davis, a very nice movie, sometimes funny and at the same time sad movie. The colors are quite interesting, they seem to be calm, but periodically there are bright saturated color spots. Next up is the Fargo series. For me, the second season is most notable for its colors, but in general, the series is very interesting. In the second season, the main characters constantly drive a blue car, and it goes so well with the different backgrounds in this series, most often with orange. Why Women Kill, this series feels like a continuation of the Rapture of Miles Aldrich's work, so many rich, bright, totally different colors. Here, a movie that has a rich red color in almost every frame, and it's a lot of fun to watch. The Dreamers, there are a lot of interesting poses here in addition to the nice film color correction, and this is something you can also pick up on for yourself and your future shoots. And the movie Emily rounds out our selection. My advice for watching movies: take screenshots of the moments you like. Later you can use them as references for inspiration. For example, once I was shooting a commercial and the references for the lighting were shots from the movie Hotel Grand Budapest. Next, I want to recommend you some apps that help you develop your color perception. Pantone. This is the Institute of Color Studies, and every year they announce the color of the year. Next, I love Hue. It's a game for color perception. Color wheel. It's a color wheel, and you can use it as a prompt in your work. Next, I want to recommend one basic book about color. I recommend studying it first before trying to read others. It's Johanna Seaton's The Art of Color. The knowledge I have given you is a base, and you can develop it further and more by practicing. This will happen automatically now when you look at art objects, analyze their color and composition, and use this knowledge in your work. This is the end of my lecture. Thank you for your attention.
My dear friends, hello. This is my additional lesson in which I will tell you about some cool features that will make your work in Photoshop even cooler and more beautiful. My lovely people, let's start with drawing volume and highlights. This is a really cool feature that will allow you to draw highlights out of nowhere. You can actually enhance existing highlights, and also you can work with highlights that are a bit messed up or look crooked. So now I will show you how it works. We select the layer with the curves and slightly raise the curve upwards to lighten the skin. Next, we will use the blending options, and we need to adjust this curve, and we need to move this curve a little bit to the right. Then, while holding the Option key or Alt if you're on Windows, Option if you're on a Mac, you spread these sliders apart. After you finished it, click OK. As always, the intensity can vary greatly, and the blending options settings can also be adjusted however you like. Click OK. And of course, we can also continue using masks to remove this effect where we don't need it, or paint it in where it's necessary. For example, here, I'd like to leave the forehead untouched and apply this effect only to the cheek area. It will be just wonderful. And here, it looks good, and here too. Let's take a look. The photo has more volume now, and what's most interesting is that this method, what makes it better than simply using curves to lighten these areas, is that blending options gives us something amazing. You can see that the texture has become more noticeable even though we didn't add it to the photo or paint it in any way. It's as if it didn't exist at all, but now it's much more visible. When working with photos that don't initially have a lot of volume or depth to them, images that may seem a little bit flat at first, we can apply certain volume drawing techniques I talked about in my course. But in this particular case, we can also work with curves, and blending options can be a good choice. Since the texture on the face isn't very visible here, this will help us bring it out a bit. We select the blending options again. We do the same steps, hold down the Option key or Alt if you're on Windows, click OK, and then using the mask we can erase this effect where we don't need it. Now we can see that the cheeks have more volume, and it's as if, thanks to this method, the texture is much more visible. It literally appeared out of nowhere, and it is just amazing. Let's move on. When it comes to a photo that doesn't have any texture or depth at all, for example like this one, we can use curves to add blending options, but we can also use a solid color. So we click on solid color, choose white, and hit OK. Then we invert the mask to make it black by pressing Command plus I, just a quick reminder. And after that, we take a white brush set to 100% opacity, go ahead and paint a highlight on the lips. We also click on blending options. We have to move that slider again, and you have to split it apart. Click on OK. You can also change the color if you don't like it. For example, I decided not to make it too white. Of course, we can adjust the opacity of the mask. Now let's see how this method can work on the eyelids. You have to click on solid color again. You hit OK. You gotta invert the mask. We apply this effect to the eyelid area. Blending options. Split the sliders apart. Here we go. Okay. We can also change the color. Let's find a color that we like. And let's lower the opacity a bit. That way we got more shine on the eyelids. And the same method, of course, works if we want to add a highlight somewhere on the face. But please be careful. Because, for example, here on the eyelids, the effect looks really nice, but it also affected the whites of the eyes, and that looks very messy and unappealing. That's why we have to remove it, of course, and leave it like this. This method also works great for shiny elements in general. If you want to add glow or sparkle somewhere, and since thanks to my lessons, you already know how to remove unwanted highlights, and now, thanks to this method, you also know how to add highlights. You can fully control those details on the face and body. You can remove highlights where you don't want to see them and add them where you do. Let's talk about what to do when there isn't enough texture on the face. We have already learned that we can use curves, and thanks to that, we can bring out more texture in the skin. But there's another method you can use, and actually, you can use all of them together. All of these methods work well, and they can absolutely be combined. For example, you already used curves and the texture has become better. What else can you do in this situation? You can apply selective color correction as an additional step and brighten the white color a little bit. That way the picture has become more three-dimensional and textured. And what's especially interesting is that the skin starts to look a bit rougher. Let me lower the opacity. So now the next method you can use is drawing in pores manually with a brush. First, create a blank layer for that. Then I switch to the background layer to pick the lightest color available. For example, on the nose, right where there is a highlight. I can even brighten that color a little more. Don't choose pure white. Click OK. Then I go back to the empty layer I created earlier. Then we choose the brush called Pores. You'll find this Pores brush in the same folder as your Freckles brush. It's literally named Pores. Now we're gonna start drawing tiny white dots. Just make sure they're not too large. They should actually resemble real skin pores. Begin adding these dots without lifting your brush. As a result, the dots will blend together to create a smooth, unified texture. Pay attention to where exactly you're applying this texture. There are certain areas in the photo, like this one here, where it's totally fine to have less texture. And at the same time, areas like the cheeks usually have a lot of texture, so that's where you can really build it up. If a part of the image is out of focus, it's also completely natural for that area to have less visible texture. We need to change the blending mode. I'm choosing soft light. After that, I apply a blur, specifically Gaussian blur. Here, we set the value so that the dots become less sharp, less defined, and start to look more like a natural skin texture. A value like 1.4 works really well. After that, we create a mask and invert it. I choose a general brush. You can lower the opacity and flow a little bit. And with light brush strokes, I'll paint this effect onto the skin. This way we get some texture, and if needed, we can also lower the opacity. As a result, we get a really natural skin texture. And it looks very real. But there's one more thing. Those were white dots. Additionally, you can add some dark dots. In order to do that, I create an empty layer. I choose the same brush as before, the one that's called Pores. I'm bringing the brush opacity back to 100% and painting white dots again, meaning I haven't changed the brush color. After that, I change the blending mode, but not to soft light. This time I'm using multiply. And of course, we apply Gaussian blur again. We have to create a mask
and invert it. You have to change the brush and choose a general one. Lower the opacity a little bit. Now carefully add these changes. Again, we can lower the opacity a little bit. Let's check out the before and after. We can see that we have some dark dots and they make the skin look more natural. They actually look like pores. So we can group it all together and see how the texture has changed. We can see that the skin used to be pretty soft. Now we can see that there is more rough texture. You could never achieve such texture with noise because you've just painted it by hand, and that is why it looks so natural. Like this. Use this method. Also, imagine how wonderful it is that you've used both curves and selective color correction along with manual pore drawing. Now take a look at how all of this has changed the photo. This is how the photo has changed, but imagine that you can also increase the sharpness a bit more. We choose high pass here. For example, set the radius to 2.5. Click OK. And the blending mode is set to soft light. Now we have added sharpness too, meaning the texture we've revealed and painted has also become sharper. This is the way to make the photo super sharp. Of course, if you need that. Now let's talk about how to remove highlights, how to make them less noticeable so that everything looks perfect. And the first method is very obvious. You need to choose selective color correction and fine-tune the whites on the black scale. After that, you will see that some of the highlights became less noticeable. You can use this method as it is, but you also have the option to enhance your results by applying another interesting technique. You can use this method, but depending on the situation, you might find it more effective to apply another one. In this particular case, we're going to use both. So I use selective color correction, and now let's create a new empty layer and work on the forehead. We take the brush tool and lower its opacity a little. Then we switch to the background layer because we need to use the eyedropper tool to pick the color we'll be painting with. I pick a color close to the highlight, switch back to the empty layer, select the brush, and carefully paint over the harsh edges of the highlight. Just like that. Next, I open the blending options and slightly adjust the sliders so that the beige color only appears on the highlights. Like this, and maybe like that. Then we press OK. Now the highlight is already less noticeable. I think it would be nice to bring some of it back and leave it like this, for example. After that, we can group these layers together and check the before and after. Additionally, you can use the clone stamp tool if you still have some harsh edges on the highlights. The most important thing when using the clone stamp is to set it up with a very low flow. This way, you'll be able to work with it like an airbrush, smoothly blending the areas layer by layer. For example, I pick a sample area, let's say from here, and gently paint over the highlight. This way, the edges of the highlight become softer. We can do the same thing here too. As a result, the highlight becomes much less noticeable. Next, what should you do if the highlight on the skin in a photo looks unnatural or broken? For example, in this area, there is too much contrast between the dark and light parts. The transition is way too harsh and sudden. So what can be done in this situation to improve the result? Of course, we can use the method I told you about, but it's gonna be a bit simpler here. Actually, we can use curves again. But you can also use a simple dodge and burn technique. Basically, we just lighten the area next to the highlight, then create an inverted version, and carefully add a lighter patch in the spot where it's needed. I use a transparent brush. You have to use a transparent brush to use the dodge and burn retouching method. I carefully add light in this area, making sure not to touch the highlight itself. I only work with the area around it. This way, the highlight becomes softer and more diffused. Just a quick reminder, you can always adjust the curve even after you've finished working on the mask. That means you can make the effect stronger or tone it down depending on what looks best. Let's see the changes. But that's not all. There's also something else going on here. In the middle of the highlight, we can see what looks like a dark spot, and because of that, the highlight appears kind of sunken in. Don't worry though, we can fix this too using curves. We'll create one more curve, Command+I. Now let's deal with that dark spot. We're gonna lighten it up a bit. Since it's located in the center of the highlight, you'd normally expect it to be slightly brighter than the edges, but here it's actually darker, and because of that, it almost looks like someone poked the highlight with a finger and left a little dent in it. Lightening it makes the whole thing look much better. But there's still one more thing that's bothering us a little. The spot we just brightened is now missing texture, and it's quite noticeable. You can clearly see that the surrounding areas have a visible skin texture, but in this particular spot, there's none. We can actually paint in some texture using a special brush called Pores, which is perfect for this situation. So here's what we do. We simply select the Pores brush, pick a darker color to start with. You can always adjust the color later if you need it. And sample a tone from a nearby area, for example here. And in this area, we start painting in the pores using the brush at 100% opacity. If the color doesn't look quite right, we can always add a color fill layer to make the difference more obvious. Let's pick a really bright color for now. Then we click on Create Clipping Mask. Here's how those spots have changed. Let me zoom in so you can see it more clearly. We've painted them red for demonstration purposes, but of course we don't actually want them to stay red. Let's choose a different shade. We can also go back to this layer, and just a reminder, we can slightly blur these spots to make them less sharp and more natural looking. We'll use Gaussian blur for that. Let's keep it extremely subtle, literally set the Gaussian blur radius to just 0.4 pixels. Okay, just like this. And of course, we can also add a mask to the layer if we need to. If it looks like we added too much texture, we can erase some of it. I'll take a soft transparent brush and gently go over this area to fix it a little. Just a little bit. Now everything blends together and nothing stands out too much. Let's take a look at how this spot has changed. Now it doesn't look so sharp and it no longer looks like there's a dent in it. And just a reminder of a method thanks to which you can tone down the highlight so it's not as bright. Take a color from the area next to the highlight and on a blank layer, just paint over it with a transparent brush. And you can lower the opacity if needed. Next, using this photo as an example, I'll show you how to deal with these tiny little hairs on the skin and remove them all at once. Of course, you can use the spot healing brush. If you want a more high quality option, something that gives amazing results, that would be the healing brush. It works much better for this. With it, we can remove several hairs at once. Just like this. And of course, this will be the highest quality option. But if we still want to save time and no one's going to look at our work under a magnifying glass, then the next method will work just fine. Let's make a duplicate of the layer, then grab the lasso tool and select this area. Click on Filter, then Noise, and then Dust and Scratches. And now the most important part, choosing the right settings. So for example, something like this already looks good to us. Let's click OK. Let's see the before and after. Also, for tasks like this, when there are lots of random little spots on the photo, we can also try using this method. Again, click on Noise, then Dust and Scratches. And as you can see, they have been removed really well. If you look closely, right up close, you might notice some small imperfections. In some cases, they are visible, and in others, not at all. And of course, you can always lower the layer opacity slightly if needed. This makes them less noticeable and it already looks much better. And there are no visible traces left. I personally think it is wonderful. Next, in Photoshop 2025, the Remove tool has become more advanced. Now there's this new option, Generative AI on. For example, we can select all the imperfections, all the small flaws. Notice that they're not being removed right away because this box here is not checked. So I first select everything that needs to be fixed, and we don't need to be as precise as when we use the spot healing brush or the healing brush. We can be more relaxed and not worry about being super careful when selecting these areas. The cool thing is that now, instead of these imperfections, Photoshop will generate a new texture to replace them. It will essentially create everything for you. Now, we just click the check mark. It is important that you are connected to the internet. Now, let's take a look at how the photo has changed. Again, if your goal isn't to create a perfect, super perfect retouch that someone will inspect under a magnifying glass, then you can definitely use this method. Overall, Photoshop did a great job replacing those areas as we can see on the photo. Now let's figure out what to do when the focus in the photo isn't where it's supposed to be. There is focus in this area and here as well, but the eye that's turned toward the viewer is actually out of focus. So what can we do in a situation like this? Create a duplicate of the layer, then go to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen, and here we need to find the kind of settings that make the eye look sharp, but not like this. So these settings specifically for this photo will work, okay? The eye is now sharp. The only thing is we can also see that other elements in the photo became too sharp, but you already know what to do. We create a mask, press Command plus I or Control plus I to invert it. Now, using a soft white brush, we carefully paint in the sharpness only where we need it around the eye and the facial texture. In the same way, you can use sharpening whenever you want to enhance texture, because right now, after working with this method, it's become a lot sharper now. Let's take a look at the before and after. So this is how you can add sharpness. Let's take this photo as an example and talk about redness on the skin and how to quickly fix it. For this, we'll use the Hue Saturation panel. I'll grab the hand tool and click on the red areas. Then push the saturation all the way up. Now, my goal is to move this slider so that the saturation affects only those red spots. Overall, your main task here is to make sure the changes are applied only to the red zones. We can leave it like this for now. Now I will lower the saturation and just fine-tune those areas. As you can see, we're now removing the red spots, specifically the ones that were too red. For example, like this. It already looks absolutely stunning. And now we invert the mask again, and with a white 100% opacity brush, we paint in precisely those areas. If you want to refine it further, you can always go back and toggle between the color channels. Here you can see all our settings. We can even nudge the slider a bit more. And as you can see, the redness has become even less noticeable. The only thing left is to remove that effect from the nose. And right now on the cheek, everything looks absolutely flawless. This is a quick way to eliminate redness across the whole face. Instead of manually painting it out on the mask, you can completely remove it automatically using the Hue Saturation panel. Next, let me explain in more detail how to work with the cleanup tools in Photoshop using the example of working with makeup retouching. Since I've received some questions from you about how to fix makeup that doesn't look quite right. For example, when the eyeliner doesn't look clear, or when there are little things like these. And I'll also explain what to do when the lips appear like this. So first, let's figure out what to do with eyeliner like this. Create a new empty layer to work on, and then select the clone stamp tool. Check all the settings in the top panel to ensure they're exactly the same as mine. In this case, I always prefer using a soft brush. Just to remind you, the larger the brush size, the more diffused and feathered its edges will be. And the smaller the brush, the sharper and more defined those edges will look. To refine this eyeliner and make its edge more even, I'll be using the clone stamp tool with the smallest brush size. I will simply carry out actions like this step by step to achieve the desired result. Using only the clone stamp tool, I've already cleaned up some areas outside the eyeliner, and now I can work in exactly the same way inside the eyeliner as well. When I work with the clone stamp tool, I constantly hold down the Alt key to sample new source points from different areas that are close to the part I'm editing. To work with spots like these, I would actually use a completely different tool, and that tool is the healing brush. Let me remind you of the difference between the clone stamp tool and the healing brush. The clone stamp simply copies the exact area you select. For example, if there's a hair, it will be cloned exactly as it appears. On the other hand, the healing brush works in a more refined way. It automatically blends the sample texture to match the area you're correcting, making the result look more natural. And when I take information from here and start working with this area, it creates a suitable texture for this area. This is also when I constantly press the Alt key to sample the appropriate texture. And then I apply it to the spots. Plus, the healing brush is very useful to apply after working with a clone stamp. For example, if a certain area was duplicated, like here, we can use the healing brush to gently blend in a different texture and soften the result. Because sometimes after using the clone stamp, you do end up with harsh edges or noticeable lines. This way we can break it up slightly and make it look more natural. You can decide for yourself how sharp you want these lines to be. I made them as sharp as possible just to clearly show you how it works. And of course, let's not forget about the liquify tool when we're working with makeup. If we feel it's necessary, we can always use liquify. And we can also adjust this eyeliner in some way using the liquify tool. Then we click OK, take a look, and move on to the next photo. When working with issues like this in makeup, we can absolutely use all the regular cleanup tools, just like before, but I really want to show you how magically and impressively the new tool, the remove tool, handles it. First, I duplicate the layer, and here's an important detail. I have generative AI turned on. This means that the area I select will be automatically replaced with the most suitable texture. Let's take a look at how it works. Make sure to double check all the settings in the top panel so they match mine exactly. And to start, I'm going to select the most obvious flaw in this makeup, which is this line right here. And then I click the check mark. The texture selected to replace this area is absolutely spot on and fits incredibly well. Now let's take it even further and try being super lazy. I'll go ahead and select this entire area and let the remove tool automatically find the right texture for nearly 50% of the eyelid. We can go over this area one more time if needed. And that's it. The remove tool handled the job absolutely beautifully. If there are still any small unfinished areas left, we can touch them up using the regular cleaning tools. But honestly, the remove tool really made our work so much easier and significantly faster. There's just a little bit left to refine, a few tiny details here and there. Also, don't forget that if you want to make this area appear smoother, or if you notice some uneven light or dark patches starting to show, you can always use the dodge and burn retouching method or frequency separation to even things out. Next, I'll show you how to work with lips like these. Of course, you can use the remove tool here as well and try to get rid of those spots with it. And overall, it does a pretty good job. But I want to remind you about another method that's always recommended when you need the highest quality results while maintaining 100% texture. You simply select the curves tool and start by lightening up the spot you need to work on. Then press Command I to invert the selection, grab a white brush, make it slightly transparent, and gently paint over the spot. Now let's return to the curves panel and let's work with it so that the spot matches the same color as the lips. We've matched the color. Let's go back to the mask and refine the edges a bit. I'll take a slightly more transparent brush. And now let's check the result. You can see that the spot is now completely invisible, but the texture is still there, completely intact. It hasn't been affected at all. You can apply the same technique to any other spots on these lips. What's more, if you need to refine the lip contour, you can also use the curves tool. For example, let's take this area and darken it slightly. Invert the mask, grab a white brush, and paint along the contour. Now let's go back to the curves panel, and our goal is to adjust the contour to match the tone and brightness more accurately. We can also work with color curves, especially if the spots are more orange. In this case, color curves will definitely come in handy, and the process is exactly the same as when we worked with this spot. Let's take a look at the before and after. Of course, when we add color to the lips, they naturally get a more defined contour. But be careful, try to avoid overly sharp edges as they can look quite unnatural. I'd recommend toning it down a bit and lowering the opacity, like this. That already looks much better and way more natural. This is truly one of the most precise methods to completely preserve the original texture and leave it fully intact without altering it at all. Let's go a bit deeper into working with colored patches. You already know the method, but we haven't yet used it in cases like this, when there are these awful, unpleasant marks on the lips from lipstick that has somehow clumped together into little lines. And while someone might think this situation calls for frequency separation or cleanup tools, that's actually not the best approach. It's way simpler and faster than that, and the result will be super high quality. I'm gonna use hue saturation and then use the finger tool to pick the color of those marks. Next, I'll crank the saturation all the way up just to clearly see which parts of the image are affected. Now the goal is to shift the hue sliders until the color of the lips becomes smooth and even overall. And as you can see, thanks to this slider position, I've been able to isolate exactly those lipstick marks. So now we can properly work on fixing them. Since they differ in how yellow they are, I need to shift them more towards a pink hue, reduce the saturation a bit, and maybe make them just slightly darker. Here's before and after. This is how I managed to remove all of them in one go, but we can also see some changes on the skin. Go ahead and invert the mask, select a white brush, and paint those changes only over the lips. This way, we have removed all those awful lines, and now we can keep working on the lips. Let's move on. It definitely won't hurt to practice working with harsh shadows or these kinds of tan lines. If you need to remove tan lines, use the method I'm about to show you. And if there are any harsh shadows on the face that you'd like to get rid of, the steps will be exactly the same. This is also similar to the method we used to remove that harsh dark patch on the blue t-shirt. You'll be using familiar tools and techniques, but in a slightly different combination and context. First, let's select the area. I'm using the quick selection tool. You can refine the selection using the lasso tool. I hold down the Option or Alt key to subtract from the selection. Hold Shift to add to it here. Once the area is selected, we use curves. A mask with the selected area is created automatically. Now I grab this tool and slightly darken those areas. Then I double-click on the mask and feather the edges just a bit, just enough to soften the transition while keeping the darkening effect. I'm switching back to curves and adjusting it so that in this area we get a shade and brightness as close as possible. Then you can see that in some areas we've almost managed to match the brightness and color, but somewhere it looks too much. Like here, the lines are too dark. Here is also too dark. To fix this, we'll take a black brush and slightly bring those parts back, just enough to make them a bit lighter again. Along the mask, I'm using a low opacity brush and slightly bringing the brightness back in this area. Also, we can see some light gaps here, and for those I'm using a white brush, just to fill them in a little bit. This retouching method is the same as the dodge and burn method. The only difference is that before using it, we selected the area we wanted to lighten, and now we're just perfecting it. This way we managed to even out the skin tone. There are still some marks left, which we'll easily fix right now. I press Shift plus Command plus E to create a merged layer and use the patch tool. You could also use the remove tool or generative fill. I'm sure you'll handle that just fine without me. Here, I want to show you how to do it without any automatic new features. I'm just gently cleaning up the skin. Next, I lightly use the frequency separation retouching method to smooth out the skin a little. I run the frequency separation action, and here we have the frequency separation folder. I go to the low frequency layer and work with the mixer brush. I'll lower the mixer brush settings a bit because it's too aggressive, and carefully go over the body. This is how the photo changed after applying frequency separation. The skin looks red, so of course we'll work on reducing the redness. I click on Hue Saturation, select the reds, and adjust them until the tone looks pleasant. Then I invert the mask, select a white brush, some areas are more red, others are less. So in the areas with less redness, I go over them once or twice with a brush. And in the areas that are very red, like this one for example, I go over them more times with the brush. And if that's not enough, we'll need to do a bit more work on that spot. We can always go back to the red channel settings and tweak them again if needed. If there are still some patches left, for example, here you can see a dark yellowish greenish patch, you can fix it using a color specific curve. Same here, also fixable with a color curve. I'll do that quickly because you already know how. And I'll add some shine to show you the final polished result. Here's what we've done. First step, we removed light spots and blended them with a skin tone. Then we used the patch tool to clean up unwanted marks. We applied frequency separation to smooth out the skin, and as a final touch, we removed the redness. And here's the simplest way to quickly add both glow and volume at the same time. I use curves, brighten it, and go to blending options to give it that gorgeous dimensional look. I hold down the Option or Alt key and split the underlying layer sliders. Click OK. You can still tweak the curve if needed. Next, click on Selective Color, go to whites, and increase them a bit more. This gives that super glossy finish. You can slightly reduce the curves layer effect, then add a mask to the group, press Command+I to invert it, and then use a white brush to paint highlights exactly where you want them. In this case, we're working on the chest area, so I will only add the highlight there. And you know this already, you can also paint the skin to make it look more tanned. Let's move on. Makeup. You already know how to draw in makeup and enhance details. And just a reminder, of course, these methods and tools aren't only for makeup. You can use them anywhere there's a similar texture or similar tasks. Here, I want to expand your understanding of what's possible with makeup retouching. For example, we don't always have to use just the soft light blending mode. In this case, with this photo, for instance, we can use a different blending mode and get a great result. So let's try that. Go to Solid Color Fill, and let's choose something like this lilac tone. Click OK. Now press Command+I to invert the mask. We paint in the changes where needed. Then I use a black brush to erase the excess, a black 100% opacity brush. Already looks nice, and now just see what happens if we try out different blending modes. Maybe you have already experimented with this yourself. For example, Multiply looks really beautiful, almost like a soft, slightly transparent layer. Personally, the result I liked the most here looked kind of creamy. It turned out really pretty. I especially liked how it looked with a pin light blending mode. We can slightly lower the opacity and then adjust the color, like this. Or pick something from the top of the color palette. As I said, this particular image works very well with this kind of tone, as if there's just a very soft pigment on the skin, or something like this. So depending on your photo and depending on the effect you're aiming for, you can experiment with different blending modes, not just the typical soft light. You can even try leaving it on lighten. That also works really nicely here. It gives a semi-transparent effect. And it also brightened the eyelids, which makes them look more even and uniform in tone. And this particular color fits the overall makeup look really well. Now I'll show you another technique how to color the lips. At first, the steps look very familiar, just like what you're already used to. But this time, for the blending mode, we'll choose multiply. So click solid color, pick a random color for now, and instead of soft light, choose multiply as the blending mode. Now invert the mask and start painting over the lips. You don't need to be too precise with the edges or try to draw a perfect contour, because in a moment I'll show you a trick that gives this beautiful just kissed lip effect. Let's leave it like this for now and see what we can do with it. Double click on the mask and simply feather the edges just like this. Then go to blending options. It's a fantastic tool and always comes in handy, as you can see. Just slightly move these sliders. Hold down Alt to split the slider, and look at that, we get such a beautiful result. Next, if you want, you can change the color, like this for example, and if the outline doesn't look perfect, just go back to the mask and adjust it however you like.
Let me show you one method you can use to add these abs to this stomach. But as you already know, you can use the methods you know in many different situations. So don't forget that with the method I'm going to show you now, you can not only add abs, but also, for example, replace unflattering lower eyelids that you don't like in a photo. If generative fill or other AI tools are glitching and don't give you the right result, you can take the eyelids you like from another picture and add them to your own photo using this method. You can also use this method when working with a body in a photo. For example, if you want to add some muscles, like abs here, or if you feel that some area needs more texture and you'd like to borrow it from another photo, then this method will work perfectly too. So first you need to select the stomach in the photo. Command+C, Command+V. Of course, at this stage it looks terrible. It's obvious that it was just pasted from another photo. Don't leave it like that. Your goal now is to make it look natural. You need to make the abs from the other photo match the skin tone of the stomach. Start by transforming the layer and erasing the edges. To do this, I choose the warp tool and slightly transform the stomach. Because it's a side view, and even though it looks great, it's still a side view, while our photo is more of a front view. You can reduce the opacity to see where the belly button is, just to make sure we're doing everything correctly in the right spot. Then we use the eraser tool, while on the layer with the new abs, just to erase any extra parts using a hard brush. Duplicate the background layer and turn off the lower background. Now we need to select the abs. Go to Select, then Subject. Once the abs are selected, we need to shift the selection line a bit. To do this, go back to Select, Modify, let's choose 7 pixels and click OK. As you can see, the selection lines shifted, and this is exactly what we need to get a more natural result. Now we need to remove the stomach from this layer. To do that, we just select this layer and press Delete. Once the stomach is gone, we enable the layer again, and now we select both layers. Next, click on the Auto Blend Layers option. Okay, all of the abs are successfully integrated into the stomach area. Now we can compare the image and see the difference. Let's take a look at the before and after. I wouldn't recommend leaving it like this. Let's get rid of the belly button on the background layer so it doesn't interfere with the new abs and isn't visible under them. The reason is, I don't want the new abs to be too strong or too clear, but just enough to show some definition. Now we can create a mask and slightly erase this area. Overall, using a soft brush, you can gently erase some very obvious parts, but at the same time,
I'd like the belly button to remain sharp because it's important for the image. It would look very strange if the belly button was invisible. Let's check the before and after. Now I'll show you what to do if there are gaps in the eyebrows. You probably remember from my previous lessons, I showed you how to draw in individual hairs, both on lashes and brows. But there is another method that you'll think is familiar, even though we haven't used it like this yet. First, duplicate the layer, then using the lasso tool, select a small section of the brow that looks good, where the hairs aren't broken or sparse. Press Command+C, then Command+V. That part of the brow is now copied onto a new layer. Move that piece to the area where you want to fill in the brow. Add a mask to the layer. Press Command+I to invert the mask. Grab a white brush and just paint in the brow where you want it to appear. We can do the same thing with this piece, but for that we'll need to copy a new area of the brow. Press Command+C, then Command+V. Place this new layer on top. Use the Move tool to position it exactly where you need it. Once again, add a mask, invert it, and use a white brush to paint in the brow where you want to fill it. If you go over any areas by mistake, just switch to a black brush and gently erase the excess. This technique works really well for filling in the main part of the brow, the fuller section, but it doesn't work quite as well for those finer areas of the brows. For those, it's best to use individually drawn hairs, like the method we covered in earlier lessons.
Let's now go a bit deeper into working with clothing. For example, here we have a bit of an issue. The seams have slightly come apart, so what are we gonna do about it? That usual little trick where we just grab the remove tool and delete the area won't really work here. Sure, we might be able to smooth out the edge, and it could actually end up looking pretty decent, but what should we do with things like this? I actually wouldn't recommend using the remove tool at all. Here's how I would approach it. I'm sure you'll guess what I'm about to do. I select an area where the seam looks clean. I press Command-C and Command-V. Now that patch is on a new layer and I can move it into the area where the seam has come apart. I create a mask, invert it, and then use a white brush to reveal just the part I need. After that, I transform the patch to better match the shape because sometimes the edges don't line up perfectly. And finally, I go in with a black brush to clean up any excess. This gives a really clean and high quality result. But what should we do about these other tricky spots? The thing is, we can't just take a piece from here and transform it to fit this area, because the fabric here is significantly different from the fabric over there, and the texture pattern is also different. In this case, to straighten out the seam, I'm gonna use Liquify. Not just Liquify, actually, I'm gonna use the Freeze Mask tool. First, I freeze certain areas so they stay completely still while I adjust others. And now I'm going to take the tool that will allow me to shift the seam into the right position. Next, I erase the frozen area with the eraser and apply a new freeze to work on the other line as well. Finally, I can touch up a few small details. And that's it. We click OK. And now the dress looks absolutely stunning. Additional practice for working with clothing. How do we remove folds like these? First, we create a duplicate layer, and I'll start by working on this area. When Photoshop has a similar looking area we can sample from, we can simply cut out that piece and place it into the area we want to fix. We are very lucky to have this area here, and we can place it over the area with the folds. I simply select this area, press Command+C, Command+V to copy it onto a new layer, then use the Move tool, Retransform, and Warp to adjust it. I create a mask and invert it, then I take a 100% opacity white brush and paint over the area. We can always come back to this piece later and continue adjusting the transformation. In this case, I want to lower it just a little bit. I hold down Shift and drag downward and drag it down a bit more. You can always go back to the mask if needed. And that's it. If the texture or spot pattern gets duplicated a little, it's not a problem. You can work with that too. You can fix it using the patch tool, for example, or even out the area using the mixer brush when working with frequency separation to make the area look smoother. And of course, you can also use dodge and burn if you want to work on specific spots. All of this can be cleaned up and you already know how to handle it. You can remove these creases in the same way. But let's also work on the pocket area a bit more. What should we do if the fabric is also wrinkled here? In this case, even generative fill doesn't really work that well. I've tried, I won't even show it. So I'm pressing Shift plus Command plus Alt plus E to create a merged layer in order to continue working. And first, I'm using the curvature pen tool to make a clean selection of this area. When we use the curvature pen tool, it works really well. We place a point and move it slightly, and it automatically curves a bit. Thanks to that, we can create a very smooth selection. This will be really noticeable right here. I place a point, nudge it slightly, and curve it to create those smooth, precise lines. Once we have selected the area, we right-click and choose Make Selection to proceed with the next steps. This area is quite well defined, so I will set the feather to just 1 pixel. Okay. I will also create a duplicate of this layer, okay? And while staying on the top layer, I remove the pocket. It's gone. If we turn off all the other layers, we can see that the pocket is no longer there. Now let's turn all the layers back on and go to the one just below the layer where the pocket has been removed. Now our task, you've probably guessed it, is to take a suitable piece from somewhere else. Let's take a piece from here, press Command plus C, Command plus V, and now we have a new layer which we need to place over the area where the pocket used to be. Since we removed the pocket on the top layer, that area is now empty. So when we move this piece into place, it nicely covers that empty spot. Click OK. It's already looking pretty good. Now our task is to simply add a mask to this piece, invert it, and use a white brush to reveal the changes only where we need them. To make it look more natural, you can also reduce the opacity of your brush. That way it's even easier to work. And that's how we've managed to work on the pocket area. There are still a few light and dark spots here, but you can easily fix those using dodge and burn. It's not a problem anymore. We have already removed the creases, so everything looks great. Now I'm going to show you an additional method for interesting effects. I selected the top and now it's going to become not just white and not just colored, it's going to get a completely new pattern. I selected it using the quick selection tool, adjusted the edges with the lasso tool by clicking plus or minus. I also used select and mask to make the edges smoother. Everything is exactly the same as we have already gone over many times. So I'm not focusing too much on that anymore, and now you need to copy the top to a new layer. Command C, Command V, and then click Convert to Smart Object. Next, you should work with the levels, press Command L or Control L, and make it a bit more contrasty, slightly overexposed. For example, like this, okay? Next, click Filter, Gaussian Blur, choose a very small value, okay. Next, go to File, Save As, and save it in Photoshop format. Okay? Then I just drag the pre-prepared image onto the top and we'll scale it down to match the size of the top. We can also rotate it slightly right away because the top is slightly tilted and it will look better if the image matches that tilt. Turn off this layer, drag the smart filters to the trash, turn on this layer, switch to it and click Create Clipping Mask. This way, the pattern will only be applied to the top. Now you need to click Displace, okay, and choose the file you saved earlier. Open it, change the blending mode, choose Multiply,
It already looks like it was always meant to be there, but now you should use the blending options. Right-click and select blending options. Then while holding down Alt or Option, drag the slider. This way you'll get an effect that it makes it look like actual fabric, so you will start to see a bit of the texture from the original top coming through. You can also adjust the brightness of the top and the color as well, and you already know how to do that, also using clipping masks. For example, we can darken the top right now. Create a curves adjustment layer, darken it a bit, click Create Clipping Mask, so the darkening effect is applied only to the top. You can tweak it, go back to the curve and move it around however you like. We can also click on Hue Saturation, change the tone of the top a bit, and again click Create Clipping Mask. We can go back to the Hue Saturation panel, and now when we adjust the color and brightness, it only affects the top. I would personally leave it just like this, without any color changes. Now let's look at the result. Before, after. Using this method, you can add designs to the skin, tattoos, or anything else your imagination can come up with. Let's move on. Let's do some more work on the clothing in the photo. Here we've got an issue. You can see black underwear showing through a light dress, so what can you do about it? Honestly, it's really simple. You just need to select the dress. This selection is only to make sure you don't paint outside the edges when working on the dark areas. Create an empty layer, then go back to the background layer and use the eyedropper tool to pick a bright yellow color, maybe from here. Now go back to the empty layer, grab the brush tool, and with these settings, I think we're good to go. Just paint over the area where the black underwear is showing through. It already looks great, but don't leave it like this. It's way too obvious. So change the blending mode to color. Now look at the before and after. You can see there's no more visible underwear. Before, after. If there are still some darker or lighter patches, like maybe you want to brighten this area, you already know what to do. Just use dodge and burn. Grab a white brush, tweak the settings a bit, and simply brighten up that area. Also, if you feel like, for example, the bottom of the dress has more a greenish tone and the top is more pinkish, you can fix that too. Just go to Hue Saturation and work with the yellow tone. As you remember, moving the slider this way gives you more pink and this way more green, so we are just going to shift the hue slightly toward the pink side. Now invert the mask, take a 100% opacity brush and paint over the bottom part of the dress. It looks like too much, so let's dial it back a bit. Just adjust the slider slightly. Now that looks much better. We can even bring a little bit of it back in this area. And just like that, we've evened out the tone of the dress. To show you the next tool, which is part of Generative Fill, I've specifically opened the Photoshop beta version. Even though my previous version was Photoshop 2025, for some reason this feature wasn't there. It's available specifically in Photoshop beta, so if you don't see the button I'm about to show you, it's probably only in some updated beta versions of Photoshop. I selected an area where I'd like to draw a dress, not just any dress, but a specific one. I go to the window menu and make the Generative Fill panel visible. Then I click on Generative Fill. There's a button that lets me set a reference image of the dress I want to see. This means it won't just generate a random dress, it will try to match the style of the dress from the picture I choose. Click Choose Image and I'll use the dress that I really like. Open, confirm. This is the dress I'd love to see on the model. Of course, it won't be an exact match, unfortunately, but the dress it generates will be as close as possible to the reference. Click Generate. This option looks the best, but I don't like that the skirt is so short. I'd like to adjust the selection a bit. Maybe I need to expand the selected area. So I select the reference image again, open it, and click Generate. Oh my god, guys, this is amazing.
All the options look stunning. You can try hitting generate again, just to see what else it comes up with. But honestly, every version looks great. And if some part of the dress bothers you, you can just select that area and generate it separately. Sometimes the dress looks nice overall, but you might not like a specific section. So just select that area and generate it again. This one here is so beautiful. Maybe just a little retouch right here, and it will be perfect. Let's take a look at what happens if we actually go ahead and work with this area a bit more. And I'm not gonna add a reference here because I want Photoshop to figure out on its own what could be a good replacement for this. And without any prompts, I'm clicking generate. It turns out completely ridiculous. So let's go ahead and do it with a reference. Choose image again. Open. Let's see if it figures out that I want this kind of skirt. Wow, guys. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Oh my god. Actually, this skirt looks really, really good. Let's try again. Okay, I get it. Let's type skirt here. Wow. Now this is something close to what we need. Let's generate one more time. This one probably looks the most natural, and that's where we will stop for now. So these are some of the fun results you can get. I think I'll delete this mess right here and just leave it like this. Overall, it looks pretty good. If you want your model to wear a specific outfit, you can generate it with a reference image. Let's keep going. I'm gonna tell you something about blur. Right now, I'll show you a really beautiful effect that mimics the look of working with rear curtain flash. That's when some parts of the photo stay sharp, but you get this kind of motion trail. I'm gonna work on the right side of the photo separately, and then on the left side to blur them individually. After that, I'll show you how it looks when we apply the blur to the whole frame. I'm selecting the area on the right. I don't want to touch the eyes or the lips, and you'll see why in a minute. I click on select and mask, and now I need to soften this edge a bit. To do that, I click on feather. Okay. Now this area is ready to be copied and placed on a new layer. I press Command C, Command V. Now we have a new layer, and now we can start working with it. I go to Filter, Path Blur. First of all, over here, we can uncheck this box. Here's how it works. We have an arrow that shows the direction of the blur. Right here, we select Rear Sync Flash, because that's exactly the effect I told you about earlier, the one that looks like shooting with flash. On this line, we can set multiple points, and our motion blur trail can have different shapes. I prefer to keep everything as it is, so the blur stays straight without any curves, so I'm gonna remove those points. Just select a point, press delete, then the next one, delete. You can definitely experiment and find the setup that works best for you. This version works perfectly right now. To add more settings, I check this box right here, and that gives us extra arrows, which can increase the blur in this area. That's exactly why I mentioned earlier that we're selecting the right side without including the eyes or lips, because I really don't want to blur the eyes or lips. Next, you can play around with these settings. I'm aiming for an effect that's not too much. To do that, I always turn up this parameter right here. I'll increase the speed just a little and bump this one up to about 2. Then I'll tighten everything up a bit using this setting. That gives us a short, clean blur effect, but the main image stays in place. And I really like that. It really works for me. Of course, it's totally up to you, whatever feels right for your image. I'm just showing you how this all works. If you hold down the Command key, you can drag the line around. You can also click anywhere here to add another line, which lets you create an extra blur or a new direction of motion. We don't need that right now, so I'll go ahead and delete it. And finally, if you want to add points to create bands in the blur, you'll need to hold down the Option or Shift key. I actually do want to add one more line, just to create some extra movement around the neck area. It definitely won't hurt. Here again, I choose Rear Sync Flash and adjust it a little here to tighten things up. That's it. I'm done with the settings for this part. I click OK.
Then I switch back to the background layer, and now I will select the left side of the photo. Again, avoiding the eyes, but we can include a bit of the face, like this. Then I click on Select and Mask again. Feather. Okay. Command-C, Command-V. I copy it to a new layer, and once again, I apply a blur. I uncheck this box here. At first, I work with the direction of the blue arrow, deciding where it should be pointing. Then I choose Rear Sync Flash again. I add some pink arrows and fine-tune the settings just a bit. This already looks great. I click OK. Next, I want to work on the full frame. So I duplicate the layer, and again, I apply a blur. I go ahead and choose Rear Sync Flash. Uncheck the box, adjust the direction just a little. I make the eyes look sharper. This kind of light blur looks really nice, very clean and beautiful, okay? Now I group everything together. Let's take a look at the before and after. Additionally, you can add color to any of these layers. For example, if you are working on this one, you can add a gradient or a solid color layer. It looks especially beautiful with a gradient. Let me show you how that works. I choose one of my saved versions, for example, this one. Okay, and now the blending mode. Let's go with soft light. That one works best here. You can of course try other blending modes too. I'll tweak the color a bit because the yellow looks way too bright. Okay, and okay. Now this already looks great. But if we click on Create Clipping Mask, that color will only apply to the right side. Of course, if we want to slightly erase the blur effect, we can create a mask and erase it manually. I don't need to erase anything here. If you want to tone down the gradient effect, you can adjust the opacity of the layer or tweak the colors. One way to do this is by using the eyedropper tool to sample colors that already exist in the photo. For example, I select this yellow color, which we have right up here at the top, choose it, and with the eyedropper, I change it to a different one. Okay, so I just clicked on the image and picked a tone that's already present in the photo to make it feel more harmonious. There are some purple tones in the blush, so that shade works really well here. It looks like it belongs. You can also change the shape of the gradient and the scale. And of course, using the mask, you can erase parts of the gradient wherever it's not needed. If it bothers me around the neck area, I'll just erase a little bit there. Or maybe just here, slightly. Just like that, you can go to the panel where you worked on the left side of the face. You can also create some kind of gradient here. And if you wanted to apply only to the left area, you'll need to click Create Clipping Mask, just like we did right up here. The next blur method is really simple. We create a duplicate layer, then we go to Apply Image. Here we have multiply selected, opacity at 100%, and we choose the layer we want to work with, background copy. The image ends up looking pretty dark, so we need to change the blending mode to screen. Now it's way too bright, but we can fix that. We just go to the background panel, choose levels, and adjust it slightly to restore the image to its original look. Then we go back to background copy and select Gaussian blur. Here you can blur it a lot, and it will still look good. It gives this glowing effect, like everything is softly lit. It's such a beautiful soft look, and it works really well. The next method. I actually figured this one out myself while I was working. I just create a duplicate layer again, apply Gaussian blur, but this time not too strong. We'll stop around these numbers. Okay? And then I experimented with different blending modes while the blur was applied. I really liked how it looked with the lighten mode. When you zoom in, you can see how the blur kind of turns into this magical glow, and I love that some areas stayed sharp while others got softened. It looks absolutely gorgeous, like we used a special lens filter. Here's the before and after. The next blur isn't really about creative effects. It's more something that might come in handy when working with the eyes. Of course, if you notice some visible capillaries in the whites of the eyes, you can remove those with your standard cleanup tools, if necessary. Also, if there are light or dark spots, you can fix those using the dodge and burn retouching method. If there are colored patches, you already know what to do with those. But what if the sclera, the whites of the eyes, just feels uneven or a little too harsh, and you'd like to make it smoother? you can use the mixer brush. It works great even without frequency separation because the sclera doesn't really have texture. The mixer brush does an excellent job of smoothing out the whites of the eyes a little bit. But there's another way to do it. First, create a duplicate layer, okay? Now go to Gaussian blur and blur it just enough to smooth out the sclera. Click OK. Then create a mask and invert it. Take the lasso tool and select just the area of the sclera. Grab a white brush at 100% opacity and paint over that area to reveal the blur. Deselect the selection. Now you might notice that the catch light in the eye also got blurred, but the edges are still sharp. To soften them, just double click on the mask and add a bit of feathering to blur the edges, like this. And now the catch light looks softer and more diffused. Also, don't forget, you can always switch over to Camera Raw and use the effects panel here. You can slightly reduce texture and slightly lower clarity. Then just hit OK. And if you're working on a duplicate layer, you can easily control the effect with a mask. And the final thing I want to explain to you in this video lesson is how to create a gradient on the background. I've received quite a few questions from you about this, and I've also seen a lot of different references on this topic. So let's do it together now. First, we duplicate the layer. Okay. Now we're going to separate the background from the model in the photo. Once we've selected the background, we invert the selection, then we press Command-C, Command-V, so that the model appears on a separate layer. Now, while we're on the bottom layer, we go to Gradient. Here, let's choose Radial. I like to use some blue shades. For example, something like this. And I'd like to remove the black in the background. Let's leave it like that. Click OK. Now, using this little arrow, we can drag this gradient around to place it where we need it. But I'd like to make it a bit bigger. So here, we're going to change the scale value so that the circle becomes even softer and more diffused. Click OK. And overall, we can leave it just like this. You can also experiment with the colors if you want. We can also try using a different blending mode. And here the best options would be either overlay or soft light. And now we can clearly see how the gradient has appeared on the background. We can go back into the color panel and change the color to whatever we need if we need to. Personally, I'd still like to keep some bluish tones here. Let's look at the before and after. Since the model is now separated from the background, we can try creating another gradient. Let's choose gradient again, also radial. And for example, we can place it in a different part of the photo. Now let's change the colors again. We can make this gradient a bit more blue tinted, like this. And I'd also like to remove the black in the background, okay? Okay. We can also experiment with different blending modes. But like I said, overlay or soft light usually work best. Although in this case, multiply also looks really nice. It creates a beautiful separation between the model and the background. So this gives the image a kind of extra depth. We can keep playing around with the colors if needed, make it a bit darker, a bit more colorful, and so on. This way, you can create lots of different gradients. You can also paint your own effects, anything you feel like adding. Let's go to the solid color panel. Let's stay true to ourselves and pick something blue again. Okay, now let's set the blending mode to soft light. We'll invert the mask, take a soft brush, and now, using white on the black mask, we can paint any effects we want. You can even change this color to something completely different. Okay? And since the model is still separated from the background, none of these changes will affect the model at all. We can also add another gradient. And here, I'd like to brighten the edges of the photo a little to get a kind of vignette effect. Now, I'll check this box to invert it right away. We'll change the black color, maybe like this. I'd like the black to become more of a light blue. Okay. Let's also adjust the scale. Okay. And change the blending mode to soft light. Then slightly lower the opacity. And now let's take a look at what we've got so far. Let's group all these layers together and see how the background has transformed. This method gives you a lot of freedom to be creative and come up with new ideas. Ways to make the background look more interesting. So yeah, thanks to gradients, you can really enhance your image. And that wraps up this extra lesson. If I come across anything new, interesting, or useful while working, whether it's a small trick or just something I think you might enjoy, I'll definitely make sure to record an update and share it with you here. Bye for now!
Let's see what generative fill can do and why we need it. Well, don't worry, I'm gonna tell you about it now. We need the generative fill feature to generate some areas, so we can replace some imperfect parts that we don't like in a photo. For example, there are some creases under the eyes and they look like under-eye bags. We need to retouch them, but if we just remove them, there will be nothing left under the eyes and the result will be unnatural. The generative fill tool will give us the opportunity to generate absolutely new lower eyelids, which will look much better. And they will look natural. So again, in other words, the generative fill tool can come in handy if we need to change some pieces, areas of photos. Especially in situations where manual retouching would take up too much time and effort. And even more so if there isn't any usable or helpful information in the photo to copy from. So let's get started. First, I just take the lasso tool and start selecting the area I want to replace. Right now, it's this particular crease under the eye. After that, I click on Window and choose Contextual Taskbar. I make the Generative Fill menu visible. To make the Generative Fill feature work, you have to make sure you are connected to the internet. I click on Generative Fill and I can leave a prompt here. Like what exactly I want to see instead of this area. You can leave it empty and just click on Generate. Let's do it like that for now. I click on Generate, and Photoshop is going to give me 3 options. Here are the 3 options Photoshop offers, and if we are not satisfied with them, we just click on Generate again. If we don't get the right option, we can turn this layer off and choose a bit of a different area. I would like to select a wider area and see what Photoshop offers. And now let's give Photoshop a prompt. For example, lower eyelid, and click on Generate. This particular lower eyelid looks the most natural out of all the options, and you can also retouch it a little bit if you want to. Additionally, I'll work on this area right here where the other lower eyelid is, and I will do the same thing here. I just select this crease and click on Generate again. I chose this lower eyelid for this eye. And now the most fascinating thing is that we can continue our work, but without the generative fill tool, we can just touch up these areas using the methods we already know. I press Shift plus Command plus Alt plus E to create a stamp visible layer with all the layers merged. And now for this eye, I'm going to use the dodge and burn retouching method. I'm creating a curves adjustment layer. And let's lighten up this area a little bit. Invert the mask, and using a soft brush, let's lighten up this under eye crease a bit. Because of what we did, the under eye crease is less noticeable now. For the other eye, I like to use the coloring method. I create an empty layer. I come back to layer 1 in order to take a particular color that we need. Take a color that is next to this under eye crease. Come back to the empty layer, take a soft brush, and slightly color this spot. Let's see the before and after. That's what we got as a result. Now let's group all these layers and let's see how the photo has changed. You can see that there are some lower eyelids, and this fact makes the photo natural. I mean, that there's no empty space here. But we got rid of some obvious under eye creases, and now this photo looks way better. Let's move on. The generative fill feature can come in handy when you need to fix or generate missing parts of the hair in a photo, or when you need to replace unflattering sections. For example, here you can select this area and generate some new hair. so that the hair isn't shorter here and is the same length as it is on the other side. Let's click on Generate, Hair. Let's take a look at the options Photoshop gives us and just choose the best option. This one is quite natural. Or this one. Now the photo looks much better.
Let's continue. Now you will see how easy and fast it is to replace a background using generative fill. Do you remember how we used to spend so much time selecting fluffy objects in Photoshop? But now we don't even need to make such precise selections anymore. We can select the object just like this, then click Generate and type in Park. Let's take a look at the options Photoshop gives us. I'll choose this one. It has a more fall feel to it. Now let's see how we can extend the photo. I use the crop tool and extend the image slightly downward. Then I simply select this area and click on Generate. As a result, we got this kind of photo. The dog is now lying on the grass, looking happy. Let's check out the before and after. Now I will show you how to clean up the background. First, we select the background. I use the quick selection tool and simply select this area. Of course, you already know that you don't necessarily need any special cleaning tools to deal with this kind of dirt. For example, you can use the patch tool and fix it fairly quickly. Also, using the frequency separation method, you can later smooth out this area easily. To make your selection more precise, always use Select and Mask. Pay attention to the selection edge and make it smoother. We can shift it slightly toward the model and add a bit of contrast. Click OK. Now we've got almost everything selected perfectly except for this small part, which shouldn't be included. So using the lasso tool, I hold down the Option key and adjust this area a little bit. Then we duplicate the layer and go to Filter, then Noise, Dust and Scratches. Just like that. Now there's no more dirt on the background. Here you can adjust the settings and choose the level of blurring. With these settings, everything gets removed as much as possible. Click OK. And this is just perfect for cleaning up the background. If there are still some blotches or uneven areas in the light and shadow pattern, you can use the mixer brush. Take the mixer brush. You can use frequency separation to work only with the light and shadow, or sometimes you can simply use the mixer brush to gently smooth out the area. But the most important thing is not to do something like this. Otherwise, you'll make a mess. Please remember that the mixer brush blends everything in its path, so you need to work locally. The same method can be used with any other spots as well. Of course, you can also use the Remove tool. It works great for that too. But if you select everything at once, the Dust and Scratches filter does an excellent, even brilliant job. The only thing to keep in mind is that after using the Dust and Scratches filter, the surface may look too smooth, so it's a good idea to add some noise. Because if you look at the background right here, there's some visible noise. Just add a little bit of noise and blur it if necessary. Here's the next situation. We have this kind of background and we just need to extend it downward. Simply select this area, and since the background is solid colored, technically you could just take a brush of this color and paint over the background. But I really hope everyone has access to generative fill. Just see how beautifully the area we need gets generated. Even if you didn't give any prompts to Photoshop, it's incredible. This option is the best one. And if there are any small imperfections left, you can clean them up using cleaning tools. I also want to talk about plugins. Many people asked me, what about the Retouch for Me plugins? I decided to check them out just for you. So what can I say? No. No matter how much you want that to be true, and no matter how much my haters want that to be true, but unfortunately, plugins can't replace a real retoucher. Just like AI tools can't replace the work of a retoucher. They are our assistants, and I will show you that. As you remember, we always start the retouching process with cleaning. When we remove small imperfections, for this stage, Retouch for Me offers us the Heal plugin. So it is the healing brush tool. Let's go ahead and give it a try right now to see exactly how it works and what kind of results it gives us. I've just used the plugin, the before and after. As you can see, it recognized some small imperfections we need to fix, but if we look closer, we can see that instead of the spots, there's now a soft blur exactly where they used to be. Not on the whole skin, just in those areas. It looks smoother, but still a bit artificial. So it's not the best tool for serious work, for example, for big beauty shots. Also later, on another photo, you'll see that this plugin doesn't do a great job fixing more serious issues, like acne, for example. Let's see the before and after. As you can see, it removes some imperfections, it recognizes them, but there are still some blurred spots. And we also see that it didn't remove everything, even though it was set to 100% in the settings. So we'll have to manually finish it. And we will also have to work with the texture. So this plugin doesn't replace our work. But if you need to retouch photos for your regular clients and you have some photo shoots, actually, why not? This plugin is not that bad in this case. Let's move on. There was this thing that Dodge and Burn was something manual and we couldn't make it automatic. Plugins can try to make it automatic. Let's take a look at how these plugins handle something as complex and time-consuming as the Dodge and Burn retouching method, a technique that usually requires a lot of precision. We duplicate the layer and click on Retouch for Me Dodge and Burn. Here you can set the intensity of the effect. A little bit or too much? Well, as for me, and probably luckily for many people, this plugin actually works pretty well. Surprisingly, it actually recognizes dark and light spots, which can be lightened or darkened. Thanks to this, the skin becomes softer. Also, as you remember in the lesson about detailed color correction, I showed you how you can get rid of some gray spots. Here is a tool which can make them warmer. It can recognize some gray spots and make them warmer. But in my opinion, it doesn't work that well. You can see it here. So I wouldn't recommend you that tool. But regarding the Dodge and Burn retouching method and making some spots lighter or darker, if you want to do it fast and automatically, and if you don't want to spend a lot of time on that, and if you don't need to do some perfect retouching, then you can use this plugin. Let's see the before and after. As you can see, actually the whole texture is still present. And we don't see any blur here. So I can say that the Retouch for Me Dodge and Burn plugin can help you save a lot of time. But again, it doesn't replace a real retoucher in our work. It just can help us. You can use this plugin, but you can still have some imperfections on a photo. For example, you want to work more on this area, and you'll work on it manually because Retouch for Me won't figure it out. And I'll say it again. I think that if you retouch something for private clients, then it can actually be very helpful in terms of saving time, because frequency separation, the Dodge and Burn retouching method, and cleaning take up most of your time. Everything else is pretty quick. But if we have a difficult photo, the plugin won't help us at all. Alright, let's try it out and see how it actually works in practice, if it does what it's supposed to do. As you can see, the plugin did a really good job in this specific area, here on the face. Unfortunately though, the plugin didn't do much in this particular area. It was actually useless. So we will have to work manually here. I've tried using all the Retouch for Me plugins, and I can say that at this stage, the tools we can genuinely use in our work and that I believe can actually help are the Heal tool, which is great for removing spots, and Dodge and Burn, which helps smooth out the skin. You can use this tool if you retouch photos for your blog, for example. Again, you can save a lot of time. These tools are actually perfect for those who want to retouch fast and they don't need every pore to be seen, every detail. So yeah, in some situations, these plugins can actually work really well. So now let me show you the other plugins. I actually didn't buy them. I didn't like them. For example, this is the Retouch For Me Portrait Volumes plugin. I've talked to you a lot about volume. As you can see here, the result is pretty underwhelming. The volume looks off and the photo instantly starts to feel really artificial. That's definitely not what we want. We know how to do it much better, and we can also use multiple options. So let's see the next plugin, Skin Tone. So basically this tool is there to help you work with skin tone. Again, I actually didn't like how it works, and it doesn't seem helpful. It looks like it works with some kind of yellowish tint and colors the skin a little bit. It gives the skin one even solid shade. We know how to color things and how to use the solid color panel, and we also know how to work with a yellowish tint. That's why I don't think we need this tool. And of course, I wouldn't recommend toning the photo in just one color like that. It doesn't look well because in real life, skin isn't perfectly even. Different areas have different shades. Some light blue undertones under the eyes are perfectly natural. Some blush on the cheeks is normal, and having some yellowish hues here and there can be totally natural as well. So I think that this plugin mostly just works with the yellow tones. It kind of removes some of the yellow and makes things a bit less green. But that's not really an ideal result, so I can't really recommend this plugin. All right, let's keep going with our topic and talk about how you can speed up the retouching process. Top-notch quality isn't your main priority and you just want to get things done faster. Make 2 duplicates of the layer, turn off the top layer, and make sure you're on background copy too. Go to Filter, Noise, Median, and click OK. Press Shift plus Command plus N. Here, choose Overlay and check this box right here. Click OK. Now you'll see a gray layer appear. Go back to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, and set the amount to around 30. Click OK. Next, we need to blur that noise. Go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and set the radius to about 2. Now select the top layer and turn it back on. Then go to Filter, Other, High Pass. Set the radius to around 2 as well, just enough to bring out the facial features. Click OK. For the top layer, set the blending mode to linear light, then group all the layers together, put that group into a folder. The before and after, but we're not done yet. Open the blending options, our favorite tool that fixes pretty much any problem. Hold down the Alt key and drag this slider, then do the same with the other slider while holding Alt. You want to reveal details like the eyes, lips, and other features. Click OK. Next, add a mask to this folder, invert it, and with a white brush at 100% opacity, paint in the areas where you want the effect to show on the skin. You can record all of these steps as an action, so if you end up liking this retouching method and decide to use it, for whatever reason, you'll be able to simply run the action and it'll do all the heavy lifting for you. It works for any photo. The only thing you'll need to do manually is work with the mask. Now, why isn't this method considered high quality? Because real skin doesn't have this kind of flat, uniform texture we created with the noise. But there's one little thing we can adjust to make the photo look a bit more natural. First of all, we can definitely adjust the layer's opacity. However, what we can also do is open up this folder and go into the noise settings. In this case, layer 1 is responsible for the noise. And we can select it, add a mask, and then use a black brush with reduced opacity to gently erase the noise in areas where it's not really necessary. The reason is simple. That kind of texture just wouldn't naturally appear in those areas. And as you can see now, the artificial looking noise is no longer visible here, and the result already looks much better. You can apply the same technique to other areas as well, anywhere this type of noise isn't needed and where the texture doesn't look natural. Also, lowering the opacity of the entire layer a bit more can further improve the result. Here's the before and here's the after. So, this is a quick method, but again, it's really only suitable if you absolutely don't care about the quality and just need a super fast fix. Something you can do in literally 1 minute. And there you go, 1 minute retouching. Let's take a look at how Retouch for Me handles this. You can get their plugins directly from their website. They do offer free trial versions, so you can test them out. And if you like them, you can purchase them. Each plugin costs around $100. The plugin managed to take care of some minor imperfections, but notice, it doesn't touch wrinkles at all. It doesn't remove them in any way. You'll need to fix those manually. The best tool to use is the healing brush, not the spot healing brush, but the regular healing brush. That way you have control and can sample the texture from another area. And this is the kind of result you get. Also, Retouch for Me doesn't really handle things like this. These kinds of little spots, you'll have to deal with those manually yourself. Now let's see how it handles dodge and burn. Here you can control how strong you want the effect to be. Click apply, and let's take a look at the result. And as you can see, yes, the retouching is visible. No matter what you think of it, the effect is there, and that's already something. But if your goal is to achieve high quality retouching, then honestly, you either shouldn't rely on this at all, or you should use the manual retouching techniques I showed you in my other lesson. Takes more time, but the result you'll get will be more professional, or you will need to refine this version manually. You can definitely use the Retouch for Me plugins as an initial step, but after that, there are still some gray patches left. And to fix them, you'll need to paint over them by hand. Because if you try to use Retouch for Me for that part, it tends to turn everything into this overly orange color, reddish orange blotch. If your goal is just to work on the light and shadow balance in that area, you'll be better off doing dodge and burn manually with your own hands. So yeah, that's my little presentation on the Retouch for Me plugins in Photoshop. Not bad overall. For hobbyist level retouching, it's totally fine. But in real work, use it very, very carefully. If you're a professional retoucher and this is how you make your living, I would only recommend using it as a support tool, but you will need to fine-tune it manually later. Let me tell you a bit more about how you can automate the retouching process in Photoshop. I've told you about how to save presets, how to record and save actions. There's actually one more method you can use to preserve your amazing color correction when you didn't record your adjustments as an action, or when you don't really need them saved in action format. A set of layers that help me achieve this particular color tone. I didn't save this as an action, so if I want to apply this exact same color correction to another photo, all I need to do is drag and drop this entire folder of adjustment layers onto the other photo. The color correction will be automatically applied to the new image. For every new photo, I just put on this color like a layer, and the awesome part is if the new photo requires slightly different adjustments, I can tweak any of the settings, delete some unnecessary layers, add something new. If I want to save this exact color grading into a separate file, we can turn to something called LUTs. Instead of using presets, LUTs, which stands for lookup tables, are a fantastic alternative. And I'm not talking about video here. I haven't tested this with video yet. LUTs can actually be imported into video editing software. That means the exact color grading you created for a photo can also be applied to video footage just by using this LUT file. So how do you do that? Right now we have our group of layers selected. Click on File, choose Export, Color Lookup Tables. Let's uncheck everything except for the cube format. Just leave it set to medium and then hit OK. What this does is generate a file that contains all your color grading information. Choose a location to save it. Save. Let's now delete that group of layers so we can test out our LUT. To apply the LUT to our photo, choose Color Lookup. Click on Load 3D LUT. I placed mine in the Downloads folder. Here it is. I'm clicking Open, and there you go. The color grading on the image has now changed, all thanks to that LUT file. Let me use this photo to show you how to use eyelash brushes. But also, it's important for you to understand that the way we use eyelash brushes, in exactly the same way, using the same technique, we'll be using absolutely any brushes you come across. For example, if you found some brushes for adding eye highlights, you'll be using them in exactly the same way just like the eyelash brushes. In order to add eyelashes using brushes, I create a solid color layer, and for now, let's just choose some random color. For now, something dark. Then we invert the mask and now grab the brush in the shape of eyelashes. We can control this brush using this setting, and the brush will rotate depending on how we adjust this little circle. But overall, you don't really have to match the settings perfectly. To be honest, you can even just draw the eyelash somewhere on the cheek at first. Next, we use the transform tool and apply free transformation. We simply position those lashes over the eyelid area, just like that. Now let's take a look at the before and after. At this point, you can also go back to the color picker and change it to whatever you want. So if it doesn't look quite right to you, you can make it more suitable for this specific situation. Like this, it will be way too black. If we pick a color that's more suitable, then everything will look completely natural. Let's leave it like that. At any moment, if you need to adjust the position of these lashes while you're still using the tool, you can right-click, select Free Transform, and reshape the lashes however you want. And don't forget, you can also warp them. So if they're just a little bit off from where you need them, you can use the warp option. That's the general principle I usually follow when painting lashes. You can also paint on a blank layer. We can click with the eyelash brush on an empty layer, just the same way, and still warp it, transform it. But the thing is, if you do it that way, you won't be able to change its color. And if you decide to change the color of those lashes that were painted on a blank layer, you'll still need to create a new coloring layer of some kind. Click OK. And then your next step is to choose Create Clipping Mask. That way you'll be able to color the lashes. It's really up to you which method is more convenient. You can create 2 separate layers, or you can start right away with a color fill layer. Later on, you can easily change the color however you like. The brushes I gave you in this lesson are free ones, downloaded by me purely for demonstration purposes. But my recommendation for you is this. If you're looking for brushes to create really beautiful freckles, eyelashes, for example, everything here is drawn in. The brows are drawn here. Even the little curly hairs also drawn. And there are also drawn in lines. All of that, those are brushes. If you take a closer look at the pupils, they've also been slightly enhanced. I used a very layered and complex file here. And by the way, I also worked with highlights using that method I showed you earlier. Meaning I was painting in some white areas and using the blending options to get this kind of texture. I also erased some of the highlights, like here in the chin area. I softened that particular highlight a bit. It's a pretty complex photo. It might seem at first like it doesn't need any retouching, but in reality, it's a great example to show the full capabilities of Photoshop. We've got added eyelashes, eyeliner. If you look closely, even the brows were added. Even lower lashes. So all of this, that's actually brushes. These are some of the highest quality brushes available on the market. Check out the hair too. Without all of this, the photo, the eyes, none of this detail originally existed. I achieved this result using brushes, and I highly recommend you do the same. The brushes I used are by Tamara Williams. I bought the set for $400. I was just really curious to see how they work. And I realized that these are honestly some of the best brushes. If you need to add similar elements like the ones you see here in this photo, these brushes are the ones that will help you the most. For example, if we look at the eyelashes, there are so many different kinds. I can't share them with you for free, of course, because of the licensing. And because this artist put in a lot of effort. She's selling them. That's up to you to decide. You can try to find them somehow. That's completely your choice. But inside that set, there are all kinds of eyelash brushes designed for different eye angles. As for how to add lashes, how to transform and adjust them, you already know all of that. I've explained it to you earlier. If you just want to casually add a few individual lashes, I recommend drawing them manually. You already know how to do that too. Right now, I only have a couple folders loaded here, one with lashes and one with freckles. There are so many different types, so many variations. The ones I gave you before in this free brush pack, those were just a couple basic options. But in Tamara Williams' set, there are tons of different freckle types. Her collection also includes brushes for painting hair strands, eyeliner shapes, and even brushes for working with skin texture. This is exactly the kind of tool set I recommend if you want to elevate your retouching work. But please don't overdo it. Let's move on. There's this common issue when you're working with hair, especially around the edges of the hair, and you're using the clone stamp tool or any other cleaning tools. You might run into a problem where the hair edge looks like a helmet or a hat. Too perfect, too smooth. So what should you do in that case? First of all, it's totally normal to clean up hair edges using the clone stamp or with other cleaning tools. But when you end up with a hair edge that looks a bit too polished, here's the thing. You can manually paint in fine hairs that will bring back some natural movement and texture in that area. We start by creating a blank layer. Select a brush, not just your regular brush. We need to adjust this one. You check the box next to Shape Dynamics, choose the fade option. This is similar to how we painted eyelashes and eyebrows earlier. But here's the thing. This method isn't just for lashes and brows. It works perfectly for hair too. Especially when you have a very flat and overly clean edge that looks too fake. This brush technique can really bring that natural detail back. Now let's set a fairly long fade value. Try something like 1000. We need to sample a hair color. So I go to the background layer and with the eyedropper tool, I pick a shade that closely matches the actual hair. Then I go back to my blank layer and with a thin brush, I begin drawing in small individual hair strands. Perfect. You just keep drawing more and more of these tiny strokes. If it ever feels like you've added too much, you can always go in with the eraser tool and clean it up. You can also sample different shades of hair color. Just go back to the background again, grab another tone, and continue adding variety in the strands. Now that edge is looking way more natural, but we're still not quite finished. The next step is to apply a Gaussian blur. This will help those painted hairs blend in more smoothly with the overall sharpness and softness of the original hair area. Something like this. Now it's looking 100% better, much more realistic. And if we now merge this layer with the one where we did the clone stamp work, the before and after comparison will look like this. You can paint in hairs not just on the edges, but really anywhere you feel like something's missing. If it seems like there aren't enough hair strands in a certain spot, you can absolutely draw some in manually. You don't necessarily have to draw using just a regular brush and color on a blank layer. You can use a curves adjustment layer instead. Just darken the area a little using curves like this, then invert the layer mask. Now grab your hair drawing brush again. And using a white brush on the black mask, you start painting in the hairs. Just like this. Pay close attention to this. We didn't even select any color. It's just a curves adjustment, a simple dark curve, and yet look at the result. We're basically drawing hair just using a curve, and it ends up looking totally natural. Here too, you can draw in a few more strands. Honestly, it's just a super effective method. But now take a look over here. See how the color feels a little different? That's because again, This isn't a color fill layer, it's a curve. So if the hair you're drawing looks more red toned, but here it's a bit desaturated and it doesn't really match the rest of the hair, what can you do? You know it. You just go into the curves panel and tweak the curve a bit. For example, you could add a little more contrast. That way the tone shifts. Just like that. Now I want to show you how you can enhance a photo using camera raw masks without even needing to jump into Photoshop for retouching or color correction. There's this amazing feature that lets you select the sky and edit just that part. But first, let's tweak the base image a little bit. I want to brighten it up because in this photo I look super dark for some reason, and honestly I shot it like that on purpose just to show you how to fix skies and overexposed or underexposed images. So right now I'm working on my skin, bringing it to a nice bright even tone. But once I do that, you'll notice that the sky is completely blown out, totally white. This is a common issue for wedding photographers when shooting against the light without a flash. That's where this method can really come in handy. Once I finished working on my skin and we can clearly see that the sky is gone, go to the masks tab, select the sky. You'll see a whole set of controls pop up that affect only the sky. I lower the exposure to start bringing back some of that detail. I might also reduce whites just a bit. Adjust the other settings however you need so the sky starts to reappear and feel visible. Once you're done tweaking the sky, head back to the main adjustments. Now tweak the saturation to bring life back into the full photo. You've got this beautiful, glowing sky. Feels like golden hour is almost there. That's how you can transform a photo. We've got a similar problem here, but this time I don't want to select the sky. I want to select the background. Select the background. Now this background is clearly overexposed. So obviously we start by lowering the whites, then drop the highlights a bit too. We can also slightly lift the blacks, add some saturation. Then go back to the global adjustments and tweak the blacks again to recover any crushed shadow areas. Lift the shadows a little too. Boost the saturation just a bit. Total transformation. And all it took was a few clicks. This is exactly why I'm constantly telling you not to start color grading an image that's still in this raw, messy, unbalanced state. Don't do that. So if you're working with any photos that have this kind of intense overexposure or deep shadow loss, you simply won't get clean results unless you're using masks. Use them. Trust me, the results will be so much better. Next, now, what if your photo is no longer in RAW format and you're dealing with some heavy shadow clipping? Like in this photo here, it just looks kind of dirty because of those deep shadows. We want to make it feel a bit cleaner, more pleasant overall. Here's a great little trick. Start by duplicating the layer, shadows, highlights, and hit OK. Add a layer mask to that duplicated layer. Press Command+I to invert the mask. Use a white brush. Make sure it's soft and has low opacity. Then carefully go over all the areas where there are deep shadows or lost details. Let's see the result. Now you can actually see the fabric texture in the dress. It turns out there were some folds there after all. And in the hair, you can now clearly see some amazing texture as well. You can adjust the brush's opacity lower. And let's look at the before and after. We can see the texture everywhere now. The color quality will be much better now and we can continue working with it. A super helpful new feature in Camera Raw masks. Right here, select people. Camera Raw automatically detects a person in your image and shows you which parts of the body you can isolate and work on separately. I want to work just on the teeth. I check the box for teeth, click Create. A mask appears that isolates only the teeth. I can focus just on them. I want to brighten them a bit, make them look a little whiter. I increase the exposure a bit. I slightly reduce highlights, lift the shadows just a touch, dial down whites because they're too intense right now, and even raise blacks a bit. Beyond just lightening and whitening, I also want to even out the surface because there are some darker patches here and there that make them feel uneven. I need to make them look more even. Good light and shadow work already help with that. But let's go even further. I'll warm up the temperature just a bit so the teeth don't look too blue or too pink. Maybe adjust the hue to refine the tone. And of course, reduce saturation, but not all the way down, just like this. Next, since I said I want the teeth to look smoother, let's go into texture and clarity. I will lower the texture slightly and then reduce clarity. And now, take a look. The teeth look way more even in tone. They're starting to look a bit gray. I don't love that, so let's fix it using a curves adjustment. After you tweak the curve, the teeth regain that natural brightness and dimension. Once you've finished working with the mask, don't forget to return to the main panel. And anytime you want, you can go back to your masks tab and make further edits to each mask separately. So now, let's take a look at the full transformation, before and after. As you can see, I was able to whiten the teeth, clean them up, and the best part, it was automatic. I didn't even have to make a manual selection. Camera Raw did all the work for me. It's such a convenient and powerful tool. Using the same method, you can work on the whites of the eyes. Go back to the masking panel, create a new mask, click on Select People. Camera Raw automatically detects the person in the photo. Let's choose eye sclera. Then we hit Create. Now we have a second mask, this time specifically targeting the whites of the eyes. Now you can make adjustments only to that area, which gives you a lot of control. I don't recommend brightening them too much, but one thing that works really well here is lifting the shadows just a touch, and already it starts to look better. Also, you can reduce the texture, because the whites of the eyes can often appear a little rough, so we need to soften that texture. Something like this. I have made just a few small changes here. Let's take a look at how the image has changed. If you want to go back and adjust a specific mask, go back to the masking panel, choose the mask you want to edit. I'll select the eye sclera mask again, and I want to slightly reduce the saturation. Not too much though. That looks good. Let's move on. Now, here you can also select a particular area manually and work with that. Let's say you want to fix dark circles under the eyes. You can do that too directly inside Camera Raw. Create a new mask. This time use the brush tool. In the panel on the right, you'll be able to control the brush size. Make sure it's appropriate for the area you want to edit. Carefully paint over the under eye areas you want to adjust. If you accidentally paint outside the lines, just switch to the eraser tool. You can also customize the eraser size and feathering. Clean up any extra areas that you didn't mean to select. Then switch back to the brush. Maybe we'll touch up this area as well, because it's too dark. Now that you've highlighted the areas you want to work on, let's start adjusting. In this case, I wouldn't use exposure, because it just brightens everything evenly and flattens the light. Instead, I would focus specifically on the shadows. We can work with the shadows using the blacks and shadows sliders. What you're doing here is basically like a soft version of dodge and burn, but right inside Camera Raw. Now, if the lightened areas look a bit too gray or dull, after brightening, you can increase the saturation just a bit. Go back to the main adjustment panel, and let's check how the image has improved after these changes. My dear friends, this is an additional lesson about color, and I'm going to tell you how you can always achieve harmonious color grading like in the best film photos. I will also show you how to choose colors so your photos can become vivid and polished, and most importantly, after this lesson, you will never tweak some random sliders during color correction. You will know exactly what to do to achieve high quality color grading in any photo. Let's get started. Neuroscience confirm that when a person looks at colors that are harmoniously matched, the part of the brain responsible for pleasure and aesthetic value is activated. At the same time, when a person sees mismatched colors or an unharmonious image, the part of the brain that processes negative emotions and alarm signals becomes active. In other words, mismatched colors may unconsciously cause tension, while harmonious color combinations stimulate the brain brain's emotional reward system. Basically, from a neurophysiological perspective, color harmony is a balance in which the visual system does not trigger danger signals as it does in response to harsh color dissonance. The emotional reward system gets activated and brings pleasure. So today we're going to learn how to achieve amazing color grading that makes our viewers truly enjoy looking at our photos so that they don't run away, so that they don't avoid our photos, but so that viewers look at a photo and think, oh my god, it's a masterpiece, I love it. When developing color films, engineers and scientists conducted extensive research to understand how the human eye perceives colors and which shades evoke a sense of harmony and aesthetic pleasure. They grounded their research in scientific knowledge of visual color perception, what makes skin look alive, how to properly distribute warmth and coolness within an image, which tones evoke visual comfort, and which ones trigger a sense of aversion. Using this knowledge, they created test film profiles and showed them to professional observers, photographers, colorists, and designers. They had to choose the options which they thought looked most natural and beautiful. It turns out that the look of film color isn't a random effect, but a carefully calibrated combination of tones selected both through scientific research and real human feedback. And now, let's take a look at specific facts. Why is film color grading always so magically harmonious to the human eye? There will be several points here. As examples, I'll be referring to knowledge that scientists have gained through research, and I'll be pointing out why film looks so good and harmonious to our eyes. I'll be showing you the differences compared to a digital image, and I'll be explaining how to achieve the same kind of harmony in digital photos as we see in film photos. The first point is, film, when used for taking photos of people, produces a soft contrast. Research in visual perception shows that people find it unpleasant to look at images with either too much or too little contrast. Film finds that perfect balance in the middle. Color films were created with these aspects of perception in mind. They had a wide dynamic range, especially in the highlights. This means soft response to light, no blown out areas or harsh overexposure. The texture in the bright parts is preserved. Even if it's a glare, it doesn't burn out to pure white. The shadows also retain texture and subtle tones. There are no crushed blacks, transitions between tones are smooth and natural, no harsh jumps. In other words, the contrast is tuned in a way that feels comfortable for the human eye, just like in real life. As a result, photos look deep and pleasant. Unlike a digital camera where high contrast and broken gradients often create a certain harshness and a digital feel. That's exactly why in my course during the second lesson on the development stage, I recommended that you always lower the brightness and lift the shadows until the skin starts to look more even and until we can clearly see the texture in both the highlights and the shadows. The second point, the color rendering is designed to prioritize naturalness over saturation. Film doesn't overwhelm the viewer with intense color. Most popular motions, especially those made for portraits, tend to produce slightly muted, dusty tones, whether warm or cool. There's no visual noise, nothing screams, there are no harsh or toxic tones, everything lives within a unified color palette. This softness of light is one of the key reasons why film photos feel so balanced and aesthetically pleasing. But photos taken with a regular digital camera are often so flat that I still recommend slightly increasing the saturation during development just to make it easier to work with the colors. Especially after we've lowered the contrast, the color saturation is no longer so aggressive, so it's perfectly fine to add a little and it will be helpful. The tones on the highlights and shadows. Film photos often display a well-balanced mix of warm and cool tones, with warm tones in the highlights usually in the foreground and cool tones in the shadows creating depth in the background. The human eye interprets this as depth, dimension, atmosphere, and a sense of visual completeness. Basically, film makes the shadows cooler and emphasizes the warmth of highlights, and those things make any shot stand out. For example, if we shoot a sunset on film, the bright areas will be enhanced with warm tones, while the darker areas like storm clouds or the deep parts of the sky will be pushed toward cooler tones. And because of this, the photo will feel more dimensional, deeper, and more impactful. Film tends to naturally enhance this existing depth and tonal contrast,
And that's exactly what we need to recreate in digital photos because a digital camera doesn't do it on its own. So typically we add a bit of blue, green, or cyan into the blacks, and in the whites we usually bring in warmer tones like yellowish, pink, or red. Sometimes you can mix them to create specific shades like peach, golden, or soft pink. And the same goes for the blacks. Those cooler tones can also be mixed and adjusted depending on what you're going for. So it doesn't have to be pure teal that you add into the blacks. You can also mix in a bit of green or a bit of blue. It all depends on the photo you're working with. The combination of tones in the whites and blacks usually follows a certain pattern based on the complementary color scheme on the color wheel. For example, if you're adding green into the blacks, especially more prominent green, then you'll typically balance that with more pink in the whites. But if you go more toward blue or cyan in the blacks, then you will add more red into the whites. Of course, you can still add other tones too, but usually just to slightly blend or shift the mood. Like, for example, I might choose a teal and red combination, but then add just a touch of pink or a little bit of yellow to create a soft peachy tone. No matter how I adjust the sliders, I always maintain that core complementary balance. Cooler tones in the blacks, warmer tones in the whites. Of course, there are some exceptions. Photos and creative goals can vary, but it's extremely rare to see an analogous color scheme between highlights and shadows. Like when we add similar tones to both areas. If you put cyan in the shadows and then blue in the highlights, that just doesn't happen. It almost always looks unnatural. Also, it's very rare, almost never, that we place a cool tone in the highlights and a warm tone in the shadows. That kind of color structure usually feels off, so let's take a look at this photo as an example and see what happens when we try using an analogous color scheme or a complementary one, but flip the wrong way. Let's say we decided to add a teal tone to the shadows and it immediately looks beautiful. But then for the highlights, we choose an analogous color and add green. And suddenly the image has some kind of strange color. We can even exaggerate it to make it more obvious, and right away we see that something feels off. So we're not going to use analogous color schemes. Even if we use warm tones, for example, for the highlights we're going to use something red, and for the blacks we're going to use something like red as well, and a bit of pink. Again, we're going the wrong way. Let's move on. Let's say we decided to add a cool tone into the highlights, maybe some blue and a bit of teal. And then let's say we add a warm tone into the shadows, for example, red with a bit of pink. This also ends up looking unbalanced. Most importantly, it no longer feels natural to the way humans perceive color, and that's why we don't like it. The one exception where we might add a cool tone to the highlights is when we simply want to cool them down a bit. For example, if the highlights are too warm and we need to bring in some coolness just to create contrast. For example, when the image feels too flat overall. So when I started working with a color here, I added a touch of green into the highlights, but it's a very subtle, barely noticeable adjustment, something your eyes won't even see. Let's move on. For example, there is a photo that's entirely in warm tones with reddish brown in the shadows and beige pink in the highlights. And in images like that, there might be no cool tone in the shadows at all. And overall, there may not be any distinct color shifts in either the highlights or shadows. And at first glance, you might think, oh, this must be an analogous color scheme between highlights and shadows. But no, there simply aren't any defined tones in the whites or blacks at all. For this particular photo, that's actually not a bad thing because the overall mood is soft and airy, and maybe it doesn't really need that extra contrast or depth, but pay attention to how the way we perceive the image changes once we start working with the tones in the highlights and shadows. We'll simply add a bit of cyan to the shadows. Let's take a look at how the perception of the image has changed before and after. Look at the full photo. Before, after.
The change is very subtle. I only added a bit of light blue into the shadows, but suddenly the image feels more complete, more finished. It's that small adjustment that made the photo feel both pleasant and natural. There are always some tones present in the highlights and shadows, but it's important to understand that they are so subtle, your eyes don't consciously register them. Sometimes you can click with the eyedropper tool on a light or dark area and notice that there's a slight tint of some color in there. But usually when we add a little bit of warm pink or a touch of green to the shadows, it's barely noticeable to the eye. In other words, we never go overboard. Do not add that much blue to the shadows or that much red to the highlights. That would look unnatural. So it is always about making very subtle adjustments, ones that are almost invisible to the eye. But it's exactly those subtle touches that create harmony and make the photo feel complete. In other words, it's important to maintain an even balance of color across the entire range of brightness levels. When film was being developed, engineers aimed to ensure neutral grays across all tonal zones, from shadows to highlights. So what we're talking about now, those slight color tints in the dark and light areas are really just minimal artistic deviations, as I mentioned earlier. In other words, when the blacks, whites, or grays in a photo shift too far away from neutrality into a noticeable tint, it immediately starts to look unnatural. For example, if black no longer looks truly black and has a noticeable reddish tint, it immediately feels off. If there's too much yellow in the highlights, it can look terrible and just as unnatural. In film photography, something like that would only happen due to a major error. Again, if neutral gray or white areas noticeably shift in tone, especially in deep shadows or bright highlights, the image looks unnatural. It looks terrible. So this brings us to an important question. How do we decide what to add to the highlights or the shadows when we introduce subtle tones into the lightest or darkest parts of the image, like adding a touch of pink to the highlights or a bit of green to the shadows? We do not do it just because it looks pretty or because it's trendy or because I said so. We always need to look at the image itself. The decision should come from what is already present in the photo. And the first thing we need to keep in mind is that we have to pay attention to the colors that are already present in the photo. Most of the time, the most harmonious shades in the shadows and highlights are just variations of the same colors that are already in the photo. For example, in this photo, there's a noticeable amount of blue, and you can also see some light blue in the jeans. That's why for the shadows here, something like a bluish tone is gonna look better than any other color. And in the highlights, we can add something with a reddish tint. Maybe mix in a few other subtle tones, but overall this image will look best when there is a soft bluish or light blue tone present in the shadows, simply because that color is already part of the photo. For comparison, let's create a green and pink palette. We'll add a bit of green to the shadows and a bit more pink to the highlights. The overall perception changes completely. It still looks nice. Honestly, some kind of film could produce this kind of color, but the photo instantly loses some of its depth and expressiveness compared to that version. So the first point is use the colors that are already present in the photo and add them into the shadows and highlights. And the second point is use color relationships. In other words, pick a complementary color scheme. For example, in this photo, we can see a palette that ranges from red to orange and into beige. What's a contrasting color we could pair with that palette? That would be a soft bluish tone, maybe just a touch of blue, because overall this image leans heavily toward orange. By adding that kind of contrasting color, something that plays off the orange, we end up with that sense of completeness and harmony. So once again, in the first case, you can use the colors that are already present in the photo. In the second case, you can bring in a color that's a complementary one, a complementary color to the one in the photo, meaning a color that sits opposite the main color in the color wheel. In this example, the entire photo leans toward orange and red tones, so we added a bluish tone into the shadows. What you definitely shouldn't do is start inventing new colors out of nowhere, like adding random purple highlights to a sunset or throwing green shadows into a photo that's clearly in an orange-brown color palette. That kind of thing always ends up looking like a cheap preset, and the viewer might not even be able to explain why it feels off, but they'll sense that something's weird and they'll want to scroll away as fast as possible. I want to remind you of another way you can influence the tones in both the light and dark areas of your image. It's not just the selective color panel we've already covered, although, to be honest, I usually start my color correction there. After adding tones to the highlights and shadows using that panel, I move on to another one, the gradient map. Just a quick reminder, the gradient map is a scale that also goes from dark to light. It lets you add specific tones to the shadows, to the highlights, and to various midtones in between. For the highlights, I'm going to add a bit more of a golden tone, like this. And for the shadows, something bluish. Let's stop here for now. By lesson 5, you already know quite a bit about the gradient map. You know, for example, that we can use the soft light blending mode, which is most commonly used for toning. Just a reminder, we can lower the opacity if needed, and you can always go back to that same panel and add a few more tones to the midtones to make the image feel more balanced and harmonious. In this case, I want to add a bit more of this orange tone to the skin. By moving these sliders, you can also control the percentage of color in each area. For example, here it's important for me to find a balance so that the shadows have a fully cool tone. So I push the warm color a little over here towards the highlights. Back in lesson 5, we already took a close look at what the gradient map is, how beautifully it works with the soft light blending mode. It's a really simple and effective way to tone your photos, and now I want to expand on that and show you how you can also use the gradient map with the color burn blending mode. And here's how color burn has affected this particular image. Let's take a closer look and break it down. We're also using a gradient map with opacity set to 67% and the color burn blending mode. Now let's take a look at the actual color palette. With color burn, you typically want to use the lightest possible tones. This blending mode is very intense. It applies color heavily. You can take even a dull grayish photo and make it look vivid and saturated. If we compare the before and after, it really feels like we made the image more vibrant. In terms of tones, I went with a sky blue, a soft blue, something orange because that color was already present in the skin. A little bit of yellow as well, since there was already a hint of yellow in the highlights. A touch of this olive tone. Now let's take a look at some other photos where I also used a gradient map with the color burn blending mode. Here's the gradient map layer. I'm turning it on, and you can immediately see that the photo becomes much deeper and more visually interesting. So what's in the palette here? These are very, very light tones. You can barely even tell what colors they are. There's a slight yellowish tint, something with a bluish cast over here, kind of blue, and another shade of blue again. The blending mode is still color burn, and the opacity is set to 54%. If you look at these two layers together, and how they work together, selective color and the gradient map with color burn, then you will see these kind of changes in the image. In this photo, I also used a gradient map with a color burn blending mode. And actually the gradient map is where it all started. If you look at the before version, the image is very soft and light. But after adding the gradient map with color burn and setting the opacity to 76%, the photo becomes noticeably more expressive. And after working with the curves, adjusting the tones a bit in the highlights and shadows using selective color, then adding just a touch of depth through the channel mixer, and doing a bit more fine-tuning with selective color, saturation, and curves again. And here's how the photo looks before and after. Let's take a look at the palette of this gradient map. Here I also used some cool tones, blue and light blue, and added more of a yellow tone for the skin. If I hadn't used this gradient map with a color burn blending mode, the photo would have looked like this. Now let's take a look at this photo. I also used the gradient map here with the color burn blending mode.
I wanted to color this photo to make it look more vibrant, vivid, and expressive. Over here, the palette looks like this. There is also this one really helpful thing to consider. From my additional lesson, you already know what the blending options are. When you can indicate where in the photo you would like to remove or minimize the effect you applied. Here, for example, I wanted to remove this gradient map from the highlights. How exactly? I just moved this slider right here. I held down the Alt key, split the slider, and slightly reduced the effect on the highlights. So when you're using a gradient map, no matter what blending mode it's in, if you want to remove the effect from the shadows or the highlights, then you can use the blending options to split the sliders in order to slightly reduce the tint on the highlights or the shadows. For example, you ended up with very deep shadows and you don't want them to be that intense, but overall you like the color, so you will use the blending options to slightly reduce that tint in the shadows, just like this. Click OK. So, in other words, what I'm getting at is this. You can add certain tones to the highlights and shadows, do it carefully, and properly select those tones according to the rules. After that, you can use a gradient map with a color burn blending mode, or add another gradient map with a soft light blending mode. It all depends on the photo and the specific goals you're working toward. By using a gradient map, you are essentially toning the image, and once again, you are enhancing its depth and natural feel. When it comes to the gradient map, just like with selective color, the same rules apply. You should choose colors that are either already present in the photo or colors that will contrast with the ones that are in the photo. Let's take another look, for example, at a few photos. This photo. Originally, the raw image looked like this. After processing in Camera Raw, it looked like this. The next step was clean up, dodge and burn, everything as usual, everything just like in my course. After that, I refined the makeup details, the skin tone, and right here, there were some bluish shadows, a hint of bluish shadows. They're almost invisible here, but I decided to make them more noticeable because that's exactly what created this complementary color scheme, a mix of bluish and red tones. It looked really beautiful and I wanted to emphasize that. I added a few more highlights, a bit more depth, using channel mixer, using curves. Here, I added highlights by painting light spots and using the blending options. There's info about that in my additional lesson. Added a bit of texture. Here's the before and after. And next comes the color work. The first step is selective color. I worked with a color that was already present in the photo. There's some blue here, so I added a touch of blue to the shadows. Accordingly, I added a bit more red to the highlights and made it slightly cooler using blue. So I added a bit of cool tone and it made sense simply because I wanted to make the photo a little less warm. There was too much warmth in the overall tone here. Then I worked with a curve just to even out the skin tone a little bit. This kind of curve helps make the skin look more even. We went over this in my course. Next comes the gradient map. There were two of them here. Here's the first one. It's set to color burn blending mode with 91% opacity. Let's turn on this layer. Look at the palette right here. The color palette here was exactly the same, reddish and turquoise. The next gradient map I created in order to make the skin look as if it's glowing from within. And we will talk about that when we discuss the softness of the photo. So overall, the color in this photo consists mainly of selective color and of a gradient map where I used a palette that's already present in the photo. This is the retouching approach I always stick to. Everywhere in all of my photos, my course is structured in such a way that I first explain the processing, the cleanup stage. We smooth the skin using dodge and burn. Then we move on to detailed color correction, refining certain elements of the makeup or whatever else we have in the photo. Create volume and depth.
texture. In the final stage, we work with color. In the final stage, we work with color through selective color, gradient map. We can also use the curve a bit, add some saturation, and if you want to add any additional effects, go ahead and add them too. This part about the tones and the highlights and shadows, and about how to choose them and the way we can apply them to the photo was probably the most important one for me, because it's exactly through these adjustments that the images become incredibly beautiful. And most importantly, I want to remind you, in the highlights, we add warm tones, and in the shadows, cool tones. If we sometimes add a cool tone to the highlights, it's only because we want to slightly cool down the image because it's too warm. Next, we either choose colors that are already present in the photo or complementary colors to the ones that are in the photo. And when it comes to practice, we start with selective color and then use a gradient map to enhance everything. The color burn blending mode is really great. Soft light is also something you can use. Don't forget about the blending options if you need to remove the influence of color from the shadows or the highlights. And now we're moving on. Why is it that with film, all the colors immediately look harmonious, but with digital, they don't? You've probably noticed that no matter what colorful scene you shoot on film, it always looks harmonious in terms of color combinations. Let's talk about how film achieves that so that you can start doing the same with your digital images. The scientists and engineers who developed film discovered that the human eye is especially sensitive to the accurate and pleasing rendering of certain memorable colors. Skin tones, blue skies, greenery, sand. We've been seeing these colors since childhood, and our brains are wired to immediately notice if something about them is off or looks unnatural. That's why, in film, those colors were processed with special precision and harmony. Experiments also showed that in people's memory, these key colors, memory colors, are slightly enhanced. People expect and prefer to see them that way in photographs. For example, the sky with a hint of magenta, a warmer kind of tone, the grass bright green, the skin with a rosy golden glow. This is not objective reality, but an improved version that the brain is naturally drawn to. Film manufacturers took this into account. For them, it was important to make these key colors rich, accurate, and with a specific, pleasing tone that viewers naturally expect to see, without any unwanted undertones. Accordingly, the other colors were less important and could be rendered less realistically on film. For example, some kind of fantasy lime color might come out more yellow or more green, in other words, more understandable. As a result, film photographs look not just realistic, but right, the way we want them to look. Film manufacturers weren't simply capturing the world realistically, like digital does. They were creating a pleasing version of it, where all the colors work well together, even if in real life they don't. Let's go over the key points. What exactly does film do? This will help us solidify all this knowledge. Film doesn't aim to reproduce every unwanted tint with precision. It roughly ignores or smooths out the things our eyes don't really like anyway. The transitions between tones are smooth because in chemistry it's impossible to jump from one color straight into another. As a result, skin on film looks even, flawless, almost like porcelain. Even under complex lighting conditions, you simply don't see blotchy skin with random purplish, yellow, or green patches in film photos. Just because film simplifies the spectrum and makes it more uniform and calm. That's why, in most cases, skin in film photographs looks very smooth and even under some crazy lighting conditions. Film smooths out unwanted tones, magenta in the sky, lime in the leaves, blue tones on the skin. All of that gets blended, and film always gives you some kind of pleasant color. Film shifts borderline hues toward areas that are easier for the eye to understand. For example, a lime tone shifts more toward green or yellow, as I mentioned earlier, and it groups tones into connected color zones. For example, all the greens or blue-greens get merged into a single one, like that signature Fujifilm green. This is called pseudo-spectral compression. It's the transformation of all rare or harsh colors into more familiar, softer, and more harmonious palettes that the human eye can perceive without strain. But in digital cameras, it's the opposite. Digital camera captures everything with complete accuracy without any filter for harmony. And camera doesn't care what kind of sky, greenery, or skin you want to see. As a result, you get some kind of uncontrollable spectrum of tones, full of unnecessary visual noise, unwanted blues, dirty yellows, acid lime shades, and the brain is just shocked. So what does it look like in practice? It's exactly when in digital photos you might see these kind of yellow patches, or magenta ones, or blue ones like here for example. And all of our retouching is really aimed at getting us closer to that final result where the skin has a completely even tone, starting from proper white balance and building the right contrast in the highlights and shadows, and finishing it all with final color grading through selective color and working with a gradient map. So during the processing stage, we can already minimize that yellow tint. How exactly? Through the hue saturation panel. By working with the yellow tones, we can make them less green and a bit more pink, which brings them closer to a natural skin tone. If during detailed color correction we notice any blue, red, magenta, or yellow patches on the skin, you also have many tools to deal with them. When we paint in the makeup details, adjust the skin tone, and tone the photo, we want to make sure that in the end, we get an even and beautiful skin tone. Basically, at every stage of retouching, you control this process. On film, skin usually looks even automatically, but when working with digital photos, we have to do all of this manually. As a result, each photo ends up with that pleasant, even skin tone where, for example, the unwanted green tone on the skin has been removed, the one that comes from the forest. Like, for example, if you shot the photo in the woods, and getting rid of that unwanted yellow tint, that yellow-green tone from the skin, is the right thing to do. Digital photos usually capture reality with maximum accuracy, and that's probably the saddest part for us, because we see every single tiny imperfection. And the thing is, now you can't even say natural is in style, we should leave everything as it is. No, even film doesn't leave everything as it is in real life. And all of those patches, the blue tones, the yellowness, the magenta, all of that needs to be removed during color grading. If we leave the photo with natural colors, including those magenta patches, the yellowness on the neck, and as you can see, the skin overall has different tones everywhere, then the result won't be good. There's a brownish tint here, magenta there, and low saturation in this area on the chest. All your detailed and final color correction, just like in my course, should be aimed at making the skin tone even. Viewers don't want to look at a photo like this. Here we have red patches, yellow patches. During color correction, we turn all of that into a single pleasant skin tone. Same thing here. This one was actually a difficult case because the skin tone was all over the place and it could have easily gone in completely different directions. But I made the decision to remove some of the warmth from here and bring it to this kind of light reddish tone with a hint of pink and wine red, and overall this is the image I ended up with. Here we also see a lot of strange and unattractive yellow tones, some patches. During color correction, we make all of this harmonious ourselves without the help of film. In other words, if this photo had been shot on film, the skin tone would have been more even and more harmonious, just like we achieved through our color correction. You can even clearly see it in the color of the eyeshadow, because it used to have a strange tone before with some green patches, and I manually retouched that, adding color by hand to make the shadows even and light blue. This is exactly the kind of situation where there's a strange, unclear tone in the photo and we bring it to something more understandable. So, for instance, we already have light blue in the eyeshadow. So, that unwanted greenish tone, what do we do with it? We definitely don't leave it as it is. We simply blend it into the light blue color of the eyeshadow. The patches disappear, the color in the photo becomes uniform, consistent, and the image is perceived by the eye as much more pleasant. And now I'm going to tell you about the main colors that film harmonizes. So we won't just talk about skin. We'll also go over the other memory colors as well. Green, grass, leaves. When you take photos with a digital camera, often photos end up with some kind of neon, lemon yellow, or muddy swamp-like shades. It looks harsh, especially in the shadows. It's just terrible. And what does film do? Usually greenery is cleaned of excess yellowness. The green becomes deeper, cooler, sometimes almost like a pine tone. A very clean, uniform green color. Film removes the harshness and the muddiness, bringing green closer to the pure version from the color wheel, that is, the true green between yellow and blue. In Fuji, for example, green often shifts slightly toward blue, into a kind of bluish tone. If it's Kodak, then there's more warmth. So what does working with green look like in practice? We need to remove a bit of the yellow. It can become slightly more vibrant by adding more green into that yellow tone. And we shift the green slightly toward light blue. We have to lower the saturation a little bit. Let's add some highlights into the yellows and the greens. That way the greenery looks completely natural. That's the before and after digital camera. And that's how the photo looks now. I did the same with these shots. The settings are more or less the same. And the green there looks much better now. Here in this area, you can also see how it looks. It looks more even and vibrant. Let's move on. Light blue, sky, water, digital camera. Often sky becomes blue, but with some dirty purple tint, or even with a steel tint. Sometimes water is oversaturated. What about film? It removes magenta. It gives the sky a neutral light blue tint. Sometimes even adds some kind of light warm smoke. Usually it's like that when you use Kodak Portrait. Soft gradient, there are no harsh transitions from light blue to white. Blue shades can never be acid-like. Let's see how it works in practice. I mean, working with blue when it's a digital camera. The first step is to remove the purples. You can see now that there's more of those now, and the photo immediately looks soft and dirty, so we can move it more toward blue. By the way, you can also lower the saturation of the purple tint. Usually it's enough for the sky to look pleasant, but if there's some overexposure and the sky is too white or something, then you need to lower the whites and highlights so that the sky appears and has some color. If there's a lot of magenta, you can also work with that tint in the blues. There's more magenta if you do this, but we can drag this slider towards some kind of deep blue. But don't overdo it. Don't make it too digital blue. A little bit like that is enough. Later, when you'll have to work with tints and shadows and highlights with a gradient map, you can add a bit of warm tones into the highlights, some cool tones into the shadows. This way, the sky will look even better. And here's the before and after. Now the sky is of a very natural and pleasant shade without any magenta shades. Red. Clothes, lips, objects. Digital camera makes the color too intense, plastic-like. It often becomes acid-like, some kind of raspberry shade or coral. What does film do? It softens red, makes it closer to a natural one without any unwanted tints. There are always smooth transitions to skin, lips, clothes, cheeks. All of these things are united in terms of warmth. There are no patches or unwanted tints. Red becomes the part of the overall palette and doesn't stand out in a bad way. Let's use this photo as an example and work with the lips here. Our task is to make them less digital-like and less coral. We have to achieve calm, red, and textured lips. In order to achieve that result, I will use the hue saturation panel. And first of all, I want to emphasize the fact that I only want to work with the lips and nothing else. For that, I maximize the saturation of the red shade. I'm also moving the slider in order to select just the lips. Now the lips are selected and I can start to work. I'll move their hue toward a warmer tone from that kind of magenta shade, and I'll reduce lightness a bit. Thanks to that, the lips become calmer, and now it looks more natural and pleasant. Here's the before and after. Of course, you can use this panel, but you can also go to selective color and work with the reds here. And here, when we move the cyan slider from red to a more light blue, the tint of the lips calms down and becomes more balanced. The last color is yellow. The sun, backgrounds, lamps, clothing. A digital camera often makes it too bright, closer to lemony, with a neon glow. Looks awful. Film softens it, and yellow becomes warm, creamy, almost orange golden. There's nothing acid-like at all. For example, in this photo, we can see that after retouching, the yellow eyeshadow became exactly that, golden, which perfectly complements the eye color. And pairs beautifully with the lip color. The unwanted parasitic green tint is gone. It became richer because I painted over the shadows by hand when I was working on the makeup details, and in the yellow, I removed that greenish tone. That made the yellow much more pleasing. How is it done? We simply remove the excess green from the yellow, like this, just as much as you need to. Now let's talk about the effects we always add at the very end. This can be grain, noise, textures, or on the contrary, adding softness. Digital photos are often way too clean, flat, smooth, sterile. Everything is polished, and that's exactly why they often feel visually boring and unnatural. Film, on the other hand, always has some organic imperfection, which makes the image feel alive, real, and artistic. So what creates that organic quality? Grain. Not just digital noise. Real grain is living texture. It has size, structure, and light dependence. In the shadows, grain is denser. In the highlights, it almost disappears, and this creates a sense of depth, like you could physically touch the surface of the photo. Plus, grain affects color, slightly bending it as if the color is passing through texture. From the course, you already know how to add textures, how to add grain, how to add noise, and even how to add texture to the skin. Here in practice, I just want to add a couple more things. For example, you can use a texture like this. This texture was actually made for me by ChatGPT, and you can easily find a good one online. There are tons of film style textures out there. Use this kind of texture in lighten, blending mode, with low opacity. So, how does it affect color? Notice how the image just becomes a bit brighter and a bit softer. At the same time, you'll see that the texture becomes visible mostly in the shadows, just like it would on film, and is barely noticeable in the highlights. Let's keep going. These can also be textures with some kind of light effects. You add the texture to your photo the same way. This one, I bought it on Adobe's website, and honestly, you can find tons of these online, all kinds of different ones. Let's change the blending mode again. Use either lighten or screen. Screen is a bit brighter, lighten gives a bit more contrast, and again, lower the opacity. For example, like this. You can find light leak textures like this too, and they'll add a certain atmosphere to the photo. Of course, not for this photo specifically, it doesn't fit here, but just look at your photo and go from there. For example, these red light leaks can look really cool on street style photography. Next, optical softness. Film rarely, looks super sharp like glass. Even the sharpest films keep a soft character in the highlights and edges. Because of this, film images don't feel harsh to the eyes and come across as very friendly. That's exactly why it looks so disharmonious and unnatural when the texture and sharpness in photos really cut into your eyes. Like when it's just way too strong. Actually, many fashion and beauty photographers remove that excessive sharpness. And no, that doesn't mean you should make everything blurry. Where did the term over-retouched or kind of soapy even come from? It's just that for a long time, many people did frequency separation retouching poorly and incorrectly. And as a result, the image really looked like leather upholstery. Like it got crumpled and soaped up, and the skin stopped looking like skin at all. But don't confuse over-retouched and soapy with simply reducing excessive sharpness. That's why we intentionally reduce some noise and sharpness before retouching at the developing stage. That's the first thing. And secondly, at the final color correction stage, we can add softness. How? Here, the original photo initially looked like this. Then there was some retouching, after which the image looked like this. And I started the color correction. I used a gradient map and color burn blending mode with this kind of palette. I wanted to make the image more colorful and less pale. It turned out like this. Then I used selective color. I worked with the whites. I didn't touch the darks. Yes, I worked only with the highlights, and this is how it turned out. So my goal here was apparently to calm down the highlights a bit so they wouldn't be so harsh. Then I created a merged layer and worked on that softness. I press Shift plus Command plus Alt plus E to create a merged layer. And we go to Filter, Camera Raw. Here for softness, I slightly lowered the clarity. How does it affect the image? It was very sharp like this. I make it a little less clear, less sharp, and it's like that. All the bright areas start to glow now. This creates that very film-like softness, and additionally I worked a bit with the vignette, just added a little light around the edges. Here you can also control it like this. The size of the vignette, its intensity, and in the end the image looks softer. I touched up the color a bit more. And this is how the image looks before and after. Now, I'll tell you about a few more ways to achieve softness. First, use a paid plugin. It's called Dehancer Film. This plugin is seriously awesome. Yes, it's paid and it's all about film emulation. You can choose from various film presets and they're not all amazing, but some are really good. And if at the end of your retouch, you pick a preset close to your image's color and apply it with low layer opacity, it can be a nice final touch. But what interests me more are two amazing features in this plugin that are way more useful than just presets. These are halation and bloom. Bloom gives us that very softness, like a gentle glow coming from the highlights. Turn it on. Let's see. It's absolutely stunning. Look at what happened before and after. That amazing softness you get with film. Halation, that reddish glow, it makes the image a bit warmer, a little more red. And depending on the settings, the photo can start to softly glow with that red tint. Check out before and after. Adding halation and bloom in different amounts can help you achieve a beautiful softness. This is a bit over the top, but using Dehancer for this purpose to get that softness on your image during the final color grading stage is really great. Highly recommended. And one more technique. It's about softness and also about making skin tones even more uniform. Here's a before and after. The retouching process was exactly the same as always. When I started working with color, I used selective color correction and gradient map, just like I always do. But there's one more technique I haven't shown you yet. Working with a gradient map set to luminosity blending mode. What does it do? Let's look at the before and after. It's like a subtle inner glow appears and the skin tone looks smoother as if we applied a thin layer of foundation on top. The opacity is only 9%. Here's the palette I used. Let me show you how this usually works and how I typically do it. Use a gradient map. I pick a color similar to the one used here. Then I hit reverse to harmonize everything. I set the blending mode to luminosity. Thanks to this blending mode, the shadows on the face lighten a bit and become smoother. The transition between shadows and highlights becomes more seamless, even without any retouching. Next, I use the blending options. My goal is to remove this effect from the shadows. So I just move the sliders to exclude the shadows, keeping the effect only on the skin. Then I lower the opacity, usually no more than 10%, but ideally around 7-8. In the end, this really helps make the skin tone more matte, almost like it's softly glowing from within. All the shadows on the skin get a subtle highlight. So this little trick was used on this photo to even out the skin tone. After that, I added a bit of saturation and worked with the curves to add some volume. There was a lot of unpleasant orange and yellow tones in the hair, which I removed using selective color. You can see I painted this effect on a mask, so it only affected the hair. I worked specifically with the yellows, significantly reducing their saturation and adjusting their hue. This is super useful when working with blonde hair because it often has unwanted yellow, brown, or greenish tones. Learning how to calm those down really makes a big difference. In the end, I want to show you how these digital images changed thanks to the color correction I did based on the knowledge I shared with you in this lesson. So here's the photo after. The color correction was done entirely in Camera Raw, but you can also use Capture One or Lightroom. The tools are basically the same everywhere. And the original photo looked like this, as digital photos usually do. After processing, it became like this. Let's quickly go over the settings. Like I said, I reduced the highlights, lowered the whites, and brightened the shadows. I slightly adjusted the white balance, reduced clarity a bit for softness, added just a tiny bit of grain. Very fine. You can see it. It turned out really, really nice. Here's how it looked without it, and here's how it looks now. Next, there are some small changes in the curve. Like I said, when we lift the midtones just a little, the skin tone evens out more. And here we also have some minor tweaks. These are the numbers I used. And then we move on to hue saturation. These were my settings here. Here in color grading, I added a bit more blue to the shadows, some orange in the highlights, and left the midtones untouched. The balance looks like this, and I adjusted everything here as well. And that's it, the entire color grading process. For all the other photos, the settings were pretty much the same, maybe just slight changes in exposure, or I brightened the shadows a bit more, or tweaked the white balance. And here's how they look. Before, after. These are absolutely amazing results. I especially love how the golden yellow color from the sunlight came through. And here too, before after. This one looks like a shot straight from a vacation. Seriously. Next, this photo. And this one. A sunset shot. Some greenery. This one with a red top. And the flowers. Of course, you can try applying these exact settings to your own photos, but here's the thing. Your photos will still be different. This kind of color grading might work really well for outdoor shots where the sun is shining, but the same color correction might not work as well for studio photography. That's why I recommend doing your color grading step by step based on all the knowledge I shared with you today. Because that's exactly how I approach the color correction this time. So I just worked step by step, starting with the contrast. It was like this before and like this after. Then I adjusted the white balance, making it a bit more golden, a bit warmer. I worked on the softness. Here you can see how that looks in detail. Next, I added a little bit of grain, just a tiny amount. I slightly curved the tone curve, this curve here, and also this one. I didn't touch the color curves much. Just a little bit of blue was added. Moving on. Hue saturation for individual colors. We can take a look at how the image changes. Here's before and after. Then let's check before and after adding tones to the highlights and shadows. It got deeper. This is how your image should change when you add tones to highlights and shadows. Almost nothing else changes, but the depth appears. And that's the most important part. Well, that's it. It turned out like this. That's the end of our lesson on harmonious color grading. I hope it was super useful for you. Honestly, I don't even doubt it. Wishing you amazing, beautiful film-like photos that make everyone say, "Oh my God, are you shooting on film?" And you can just smile and say, "No, I shoot digital. I just know how to do color grading." Thanks everyone for watching. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Tatiana Sholokova, I'm a photographer, and this is my lecture about composition in photography. I promise that it will be very simple and understandable. Let's start by answering the question, what is composition? Composition, in simple words, is how you position your objects, subjects, and people in the frame. Composition has its own patterns and techniques for a harmonious and expressive result. Our job to get the viewer to fix their eyes on the most important objects in the frame and allow them to look at the details. The eye has to travel, so say Diana Vreeland, and here I agree with her. After you learn about these patterns and techniques, in time you will look at paintings, photos, films, and other forms of art and automatically read through what techniques the object of art looks expressive and harmonious. And of course, this will affect your work. You will start to see and feel the frame better on your shoots, and when processing you will see the main objects and make them more expressive. So your shooting and processing will become more conscious. Well, let's start getting familiar with these techniques and patterns. Throughout this lecture I will be showing you photos, film scenes, paintings, and I will talk about what techniques the author may have used. Paintings are the oldest art. They are what existed before photography, and we can learn from artists their techniques. And in films we can see how through composition directors control our emotions and feelings. And the first technique is the compositional center. This is the point where the viewer pays attention first, and this point is usually located to the most important object. For example, you see a picture like this, and here the compositional center is what you pay attention to first. All good art always has this point. The main object in the compositional center can stand out due to size, shape, or color. Shadows and highlights will also be of great importance. If the shadows are hard, they can look like separate figures and objects. For example, here we can see that the bottle stands out due to the black bright spot. Here the man is small in size compared to everything else, but it's he who attracts our gaze because he is different in shape and color. The other objects are saturated, colored, and have the same angular shape, and the black spot with the silhouette looks like it's a hole in the colored garment, and this is immediately apparent. And here we immediately notice the pink cap and the face in the first place. When in the frame the face is turned toward us, it always attracts the most attention even though the hat is quite large. Further, here a small sheep attracts our attention with its unique shape. No other object in this frame has such a shape. Here we immediately notice the girl in pink, despite the large size of the stones. It's because she is in such a bright pink dress, and it's the brightest spot in this shot. This is a good example of how bright color draws attention to itself. Notice that the yellow is also quite bright, but it takes up most of the frame and looks uniform. That's why we only notice it after the pink spot. The yellow color here is rather a successful complement to the pink. Next, here we immediately pay attention to the girl in front. She is different and stands out by her size. She occupies quite a large part of the frame and is the compositional center. Here note how big the green tree is, and it seems that it could take up all the attention. But this doesn't happen because it's against the sky and there is an analog combination of colors. That is, blue and green are similar colors and one is not a contrast to the other at all. When you will watch my lecture about color, you will learn more about color combination schemes. Eventually, the tree almost blends into the sky and our attention is drawn to the girl in the white dress. This is quite a bright and noticeable spot in this shot. Here, despite the bright color of the green curtain on the right, we still immediately notice the bouquet of flowers, and then our gaze slides over the sculpture, as the shape of the body will always win and attract attention like the head turned to the viewer. And here is a very big head almost in the whole frame, and of course we immediately pay attention to it. And this is a completely golden picture. The close look is a whole with the background, the picture is shiny and bright, but we look first of all at this small face. It stands out with its shape and color. And this is the most important thing in the frame, to show the emotion on the face. It's the same here. The picture is dark and only Mona Lisa's light skin immediately attracts our attention. Of course, we immediately pay attention to her eyes, then to her chest, and the final part to her calmly folded hands. Here we see 4 oval spots. They are quite substantial and there is a lot of detail, but the first thing we look at is how the hands almost touch at this point. They stand out with their shape against a homogeneous background, plus there is an emotional and exciting moment of communication on this. And after seeing that point, our gaze travels wider, getting information about the main characters in this picture. And here is an interesting moment when there is no definite point and we look at the picture in its entirety. We can assume that this is the rare case when there is no compositional center. Here it is as if the silhouettes of people were cut out of the painting. And firstly, it's a wonderful stylistic device. Secondly, the picture looks like a pattern because there is approximately the same amount of background and people, and they are located on the whole surface of the frame. But we pay attention to the white silhouettes anyway because they are brighter. And here it's the same effect, except the silhouettes are red. Again, note that the background is made of similar colors, blue and green, and red looks as contrasty as possible in relation to them. Plus, it creates volume, and we understand that the picture has a background and a foreground. Now imagine, would this picture be so expressive if the figures were purple? Not at all. The painting would lose volume, and everything would blend together and look abstract, like a carpet on a wall. And the compositional center can be made up of several figures, like the girl with the sink in this painting. The sink doesn't draw attention to itself in any way and merges with the body of the girl. Let's move on, and now let's understand how to harmoniously place the compositional center. So we came to the study of compositional techniques that will make your shots interesting and memorable. We have only 2 basic techniques and all the rest will be an addition. The first technique is the rule of thirds. This is the simplified rule of the golden ratio. If we divide the frame into 9 equal parts, we have a frame like this. It's familiar to you. You always see it at the moment of shooting or when you frame a photo at the moment of processing. The essence of the rule is simple. Your compositional center, your main object of the photo, which the viewer should look at first of all, should be located on the lines or their intersection. Let's look at this picture. I have divided it into 9 parts, and we can see that the main subject is just positioned clearly on the vertical line on the left and stands exactly on the horizontal line at the bottom. Not always everything coincides so clearly by centimeters, but the approximate location is always on these lines and places of intersection. And this can be determined even intuitively. For example, here the horizon passes on this line and the path on the bottom line. This is such a harmonious landscape in the end. Next, let's look at this photo. Here on one of the lines we have a compositional center, it's the head of the model. And since this is a fashion shot about jewelry, for example it's a big ring, we need to draw attention to it, and it works well when we place it at the intersection of lines and in focus, unlike the hand on the right. Next we have a shot from the film where we see the hero's head placed on one of the lines in the most classical way. We go further, and here again we see that the faces we are focusing on are also placed on these lines. How can you use this? Simply determine what is most important in your shot and draw maximum attention to it by placing that important object or objects on the lines or their intersection. Here the main figure is the bride, and again she is positioned on the lines, while everything else revolves around her and is an addition through which we learn more about her. And here we see that the bright and conspicuous white dress is also positioned on one of the lines. Moving on, and here all the objects are lined up clearly as if on a ruler. This house, which is like on the soul and in the heart, it's located clearly at the intersection of the lines. Here we have a modern still life, and all this construction with the flower is located clearly on the line. And here too. Plus notice also the lines merge beautifully here. This grass looks like an extension of the leg. Okay, next, this is the book cover, and to draw maximum attention to the jewelry on the hands, we have a blue balloon here, and it takes a lot of attention, after which we notice this jewelry just. Moving on here, the characters are the intersection of the lines. There is a rule here: if the heroes look in some direction, for example, they look to the right, then we must have some space on the right, because unconsciously our gaze travels to the direction where a person looks or points. Our consciousness is interested to know what is in that direction. Here the character looks to the left, leaving the viewer room for imagination. But there are also times when rules are broken, and for films it can be quite normal for the hero to look to the edge of the frame, because in films we are always shown in the next frame what the hero is looking at. In the case of a photo or a painting, this is rarely the case. But there is never anything for nothing, and there is nothing superfluous. Any color and composition is always throughout in detail, depending on the story the author wants to tell or the emotion he wants to convey. And here is an interesting moment. Despite the fact that the man is sitting in the center of the frame and we can clearly see him in the bright light, our attention is still drawn to the girl in the foreground. She dances luxuriously with her eyes downward, but it's only after her that we assess the man with a glance. Nevertheless, the contact between them is very strong due to their gazes. Now let's discuss the second basic technique in composition. It's called centered composition or symmetry. Centered composition is most often used for portraits like this. Artists like to have the main object in the center. And here in the center we have the main character, and everything else in the frame is subordinate to him. This technique of centered composition enhances the perception that this character in the center is the most important. Plus, pay attention to the lines. All the lines seem to be directed towards the central figure, and this reinforces the feeling of importance as well. Here is a very simple example. The sun is the main object of this painting. It is in the center. It stands out with its shape and bright color, and even the trees are reaching towards this point. This is an example of symmetry. Symmetry is when one part of the frame is similar to the opposite part, and in the midst of this symmetry we have a figure in the center. It draws attention to itself immediately, and it's right, because the film tells the story of this particular character. Everything else here is just the space in which the protagonist exists. And here we also observe centered composition and symmetry. And here the center is the red head. It stands out very brightly against the background of similar shades of green and blue, and even the body does not stand out as brightly as this head. Here the center will be a woman with a child against the sky, and all other heroes will also obey her and look in her direction. And here the center is of course the hero. He looks contrastingly against the sky, and the horse doesn't look so bright, even with its size and brightness, because its head is not so contrasted against the sky. The center here is the figure as a whole, and especially the flower. It looks surreal, and we pay attention to it immediately, and then our gaze slides to the clothes and accessories. In this example, the glare of light falls on the eyes, and this is a great technique to show the main center of the frame and draw attention to the calm emotion of the model, while the hero is at all restless and as if in the wind. This picture is about makeup, so in the very center is the main element, it's the drawing on the face. And here in the center we immediately see the eye of the model, and it's very good that we have a lot of air around. If this photo was cropped and we did not have the space at the top, it would not be as attractive and expressive. It's this free space that keeps the eye in the center, and the earring follows the round shape of the shiny pupil and is a great addition. Let's keep looking. The centerpiece here is the earring. It stands out because of the bright color. Plus, notice the lines. The back line leads to the earring, the headline leads to the earring, the white lines above the eyes also lead to the earring, and all these lines seem to continue into the earring with rounded shapes. Next is a still from a movie directed by Wes Anderson. He likes to use symmetry. It seems that the bodies are the same size, the objects are the same size, the bushes are the same, and the yellow suitcase on the right does not outweigh the frame because the girl's body is completely light, unlike the boy's, and due to its lightness it balances the frame on the left, and the bright blue color of the player as the center and the culprit of the celebration because it produces the very music to which they are dancing. And here is another example of symmetry. It seems that all objects are clearly aligned by centimeters. A couple more words about how light and shadow affect the composition. This is a hand shadow and it certainly looks very striking in contrast to the face. Of course, it's the center that draws attention to itself. Now imagine that there is no sun and no shadow either. In this case, the photo would be much more boring because it would be just a man lying on the grass without emotions. Let's go further and move on to the topic, the law of balance in composition and composition as a geometric figure. By now we have learned that there is always a compositional center in the frame. It's some important object to which we attract maximum attention. This object can stand out by its shape, brightness and color. Plus, for the greatest harmony, we have two basic techniques that tell us in what part of the frame it's better to place this important object. Next, we will dive even deeper into this topic and learn to see more than just the compositional center and its placement. And now we'll look at how some objects in the frame balance others and harmony is achieved. Let's imagine that the red sleeves on the right are not red, but for example white. Then the girl on the left in red would significantly outweigh the left side of the frame and it would not look so harmonious. Accordingly, these red sleeves on the right perfectly balance the frame and it looks good. And here try to imagine that this man in yellow is not here. Without him the picture will cease to look harmonious. This yellow bright spot perfectly balances the left side, because on the right the woman is quite massive and the bush behind her too. So we need something on the left side that balances the frame. Here you can cover the peaches with your hand and see that the picture will not look so harmonious. These peaches here play an important role, they balance the whole picture. Without them, the lower part of the frame would be just superfluous and would not carry any information. Plus, these yellow peaches perfectly match the color and shape of the window. Also, it's good when you can visually draw a geometric figure between the objects in the frame, especially a triangle. Here you can visualize many triangles between the objects. Then there is a big figure on the left and a small figure on the right, but thanks to the sun on the side of the small figure, the frame is balanced and looks harmonious. There is also a repeating circle here, two round heads and a round sun. Between these three circles you can also draw a triangle. Further, here you can get a triangle too, between the rock leaves and the model, and if there were no dark contrasting greenery here and the shadow from it, the frame would not be balanced and would not look so expressive. So this greenery here makes a difference. Note that on the right the rocks and the model take up a lot of space, but the whole thing is light. So to balance out the large light part, there can always be enough of a small dark or saturated contrasting spot on the other side of the frame. This is just such a case. Next, here is an example where color affects the composition. Note here we have a yellow dress and diagonally we see a green dress. And green and yellow is an analogous combination of colors. And the pink and blue dress in the middle are contrasting in relation to each other. So it turns out that horizontally the yellow spot balances the green and vertically the pink balances the blue. Try to imagine an orange or yellow dress instead of a pink one. It will be quite a different effect of perception. Also, this composition can be read in a different way. Blue, green and yellow colors are similar to each other and can look like one big general mass, but the small pink spot balances this large mass on the other side of the frame. Next, we come to the topic statics and dynamics. This is the thing that affect our emotions and perceptions. Here we are looking at a painting. It's quite dynamic. There is action going on. There is a lot of different angular and broken lines. Same thing here, there is a lot of rounded lines. And here the horizon is slightly elevated on the right, but the hair on the left balances it. Plus the way they fly and the way their clothes are carelessly disheveled creates dynamics and we feel their speed. The horizon line goes far away and strengthens this perception of aspiration. Here there is a similar motion of striving towards the sun, hands in motion, hair developing and we feel the movement. Here the wind slightly blows her clothes, the girl steps, hands in different directions, and we again feel the dynamics of movement and inspiration. Here we see the wind tearing and flailing. We read the unsettling windy mood through the jagged broken lines of the trees and clouds. And here is a contrast. A very calm girl lying straight down horizontally. Notice how many horizontal straight lines there are. They're all quite peaceful. It's a static picture. Absolutely static is the dress hanging in the closet. A lot of vertical calm repeating lines, which we will talk about later. And here again, people are lying horizontally, absolutely calmly and statically. And here they are standing absolutely calmly and statically. Here too, everything is calm. A calm horizon line, a person lies calmly, another person behaves calmly. Everything here is quiet and humble. Next, let's look at such a technique as a composition in a frame. And again, we will pay attention to the volume, which is achieved by diversity. When we have something in the background, something in the foreground, a framed composition is when we have some kind of frame that is created by additional subjects or objects in the foreground. For example, the person here is framed, and due to this, the picture always looks much more volumetric. If there was no frame, there would be less volume. Let's go further. Here we see a person in a frame of another person, and this gives us an impressive volume. We can clearly see the separation between the background and the foreground. Here is the frame due to the light, and here is the person in it, and the head stands out the most here, of course. And here is another example of volume. Here we see several plants, a bird in the foreground, birds in the background, a model in the middle ground, and this creates volume. And also here the lines of the model's body perfectly follow the lines of the birds, and it looks amazingly harmonious. Here we also have the background and the foreground. Note that while we are looking at volume, frames, statics and dynamics and other micro techniques, the two main techniques in the composition are present in each of the pictures. Here, for example, the face is placed on a line according to the rule of thirds. Next, we will discuss form and texture, which I also consider to be an important theme in composition. It's that theme where the shape, textures or lines of different objects are combined in a shot. Here is a good example. The curly texture of the clothes completely repeats the curly texture of the greenery, and it looks very harmonious. And of course, this is a centered composition. The trick is that the combination of these textures is not accidental. The stylist or photographer might have known that he has going to shoot such a curly dress, and he might have specifically matched that background to it. So you can manage your shoots the same way and be conscious about choosing clothes, accessories, locations, colors, textures, and so on. Another good example, and here I also think that such hands were specifically chosen to shoot such a gaunt jewelry. Notice how the textures and shapes of the hands and the jewelry are perfectly matched. Here is a very cool example. The photo is about the girl and her beauty, but she is not simple as it may seem. Notice how the light falls in lines, and those same lines are in these shells. It blends and harmonizes very nicely and looks just perfect. To an ordinary viewer who doesn't know how to notice such moments, this photo will seem just beautiful and harmonized. But beauty and harmony are created precisely by knowing and understanding the techniques of composition. Try to visually remove these lines of light from the frame, and it will immediately cease to be so interesting. And here are the top part of the dress in the form of a half a lemon, which are in the back, and you immediately realize that no fools worked on the frame. Everything here is beautiful, and everything is there for a reason, and lemons are appropriate here. And here we see flowers on the face of a novel rounded shape, and this shape and lines are repeated in the hair and earrings. And in this shot, the water splashes look like the shape of a blouse. I'm sure the photographer or stylist specifically chose this water idea because they were looking for a similar shape in the space that would blend well with the shape of the clothes. Plus, this shot is dynamic, and the face is placed at the intersection of lines by the rule of thirds. And here for the clothes, the pose and the hair are perfectly matched. Hair wavy as a blouse, and the pose as flowing as well as the fabric of the blouse. The effect of harmony is enhanced by the fact that the face is placed on a vertical line, and everything else is also as if lined up vertically in a relaxed static state. And let's talk a little bit more about lines. When many similar repeating lines are combined in the frame, it again creates harmony. For example, there are about 16 lines in this shot. Lines of the mirror, doors, hair, legs, lamps, that sort of thing. Next, this is my favorite example. Here all the lines lead to one point. In the story, mom and her child are riding an escalator, and when they reach this point, this child falls and we see this shot where all the lines are pointing down to heighten the perception of the fall. And of course, it has a big impact on the emotions of the viewer. I love watching movies and noticing how the directors make me feel the emotions of the characters better through composition. Moving on, notice here how the lines flow from one to the other and how many repeated rounded lines there are. But they are only in the foreground. In the background, the lines are quite different. They are angular, and this perfectly creates volume and show us the contrast between the background and the foreground. Further, here we have a head just on the horizon line, and also the shadow looks very interesting, as if repeating the profile of the model. Here we seem to have just a portrait, but the background is well chosen. We can see that the dress has an oblique line, and on the background, parallel to this line, are lines of mountains. And it's just such an ordinary example where we have just different strokes of cream combined, and they have such soft rounded lines that unconsciously we read that these creams are also so soft. And finally, let's discuss framing in processing. As you realize, you can control the composition at the moment of shooting and notice all the harmonious combinations of objects. But when processing, you can also influence the composition by framing. Use this tool to the maximum and never rush to delete any frame. For example, I had a raw photo like this and I could have deleted, but I saw how I could crop it to make it attractive. Next, here is a totally boring shot on the left, but it turned out to be a nice beauty shot when I cropped it in the end. This is the end of my lecture and how you know how to make a cool composition in your photos. Now, when you watch some cool movies, clips, paintings or photos, try to think about what composition makes the frame look interesting. What makes your emotions brighter, what lines, shapes and textures make anything in that shot eye-catching. Constant review and analysis of quality content will allow you to develop your visual experience, and the more you pick up on the techniques of composition in any art form, the more you get pumped in it. Eventually, the knowledge of composition will be deposited in your subconscious, and you will automatically create cool composition in your photos. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. Bye bye.